Constitutional Promises and India's Development in 75 Years under the theme 2, which is titled as Constitution, Welfare and Development of this Constitution and National Unity Convention organized by the Government of Karnataka. As we gather here today, we embark upon this crucial and special journey of exploration and discourse concerning the fundamental pillars of our society and democracy, the Constitution, welfare, and national unity. We have amongst us an esteemed panel of speakers comprising of leading intellectuals, scholars, who will guide us through this enriching discourse. So without further ado, I would like to welcome on stage with your huge round of applause, Professor M.B. Rajeev Gowda. Sir, please come on the stage. Professor Jayati Ghosh ma'am, Sri Anurag Beher, Professor Himanshu, and Professor Surinder Singh Jyotka sir. Moving forward, I would like to request Professor Krishnaraj, Professor of Economics, Institute for Social and Economic Change, to honor our guests with some token of thankfulness. Please give a huge round of applause. Thank you, sir. Now I would like to request Professor Krishnaraj to introduce to us the title and the theme of this convention. Over to you, sir.
I am highly pleased to welcome our distinguished panelists for this two-day National Convention on Constitution and National Unity. We have a well-learned academicians who have been instrumental in bringing many policies throughout the country. They are with us. We are happy to listen to them in this conference. I am highly privileged to invite them for this panel on development, welfare, and progress. Especially this theme focuses on the constitutional promises and India's development in 75 years. It provides a comprehensive examination of job opportunities, income and wealth distribution, affirmative policies, and the state of education and employment while addressing both public and private sectors. Even though we have completed 75 years of India's constitution, which was adopted by the Constituent Assembly on 26 November 1949. So we have entered into the 75th years of Indian Constitution. There are several promises, especially one of the promises is achieving the equity and justice. So this privileged panel, very distinguished panelists, they are going to discuss for next 1 hour the issues relating to income inequality and developmental achievements in the Indian context, and what affirmative policies they are very effective to bring all the people under equality and equity. So I request Kai Balyapati to take over and conduct this one. Please welcome the guest and conduct it. Thank you one and all for your presence here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your lucid introduction. And I would like to introduce our esteemed guests of the occasion. I will start with Professor M.B. Rajeev Gowda. He is also the chairperson of this panel discussion. He hails from a distinguished family in Bangalore, and he has a legacy of public service and has kept his career as an Indian politician and academician. He has a PhD from Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, and he has served as a member of Parliament in Rajya Sabha and a national spokesperson for Indian National Congress. Our next speaker is Professor Jayati Ghosh, ma'am. Professor Ghosh is a distinguished economist with a robust academic background, holding degrees from Delhi University and University of Cambridge. And she is a co-founder of Economic Research Foundation, Delhi, and Executive Secretary of IDEAS. She has written the acclaimed West Bengal Human Development Report. Professor Ghosh has been allocated with immense prestige and different prizes like UNDP Prize and the Fellow of International Economic Association. She also received the prestigious Galbraith Prize in 2023. Congratulations, ma'am, on that. And thank you so much for joining us. Our next esteemed speaker is Professor Sri Anurag Beher. Sri Anurag Beher is the CEO of Azim Premji Foundation and Chancellor of Azim Premji University. He has been recognized as Young Global Scholar by the World Economic Forum. Sri Anurag Beher contributes to National Mission on Teacher and Teachers Education and Government of India's Implementation Committee for the Justice Burma Commission. We also have amongst us Professor Himanshu. Professor Himanshu is an economist specializing in poverty, inequality, employment, agriculture, and development economics. He holds a PhD from CSP JNU Delhi, and he has garnered several recognitions named C.R. Parekh Fellowship and Sanjay Thakur Young Economist Award. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Last but not least, we have Professor Surinder Singh Jodhka. Professor Jodhka is a distinguished sociologist with expertise in social stratification, development studies focusing in rural and agrarian change, and investigations into social identities, including caste and religious minorities. He has held significant academic positions like professors at School of Social Sciences, JNU, New Delhi. He has been allocated with the ICSR Amartya Sen Award for Distinguished Social Scientist in Sociology, and he has served as country coordinator for Religion and Development Research Program and is the member of Global Network on Inequality at Princeton University. Thank you so much to all our esteemed panelists for joining us. Now I would like to hand over the session to our esteemed chairperson, Professor Rajeev Gowda, to take this session forward. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very Thank you very much. And thanks to Professor Krishna Raj and the Institute for Social and Economic Change for putting together such a star-studded panel. I would like to sit in each of their classes for hours on end. On this occasion, we're only going to get just a pearl or two of wisdom from their immense knowledge of the diverse range of topics that are consideration this afternoon. Let me get down to the topic right away. You recall that Prime Minister Nehru said the ambition of the greatest man of our generation was to wipe a tear from every eye, right? And then he talked about that as being an unfinished mission. And that vision, mission, was encapsulated in the Constitution and right in the preamble, which all of us know very, very well. We laid out certain aspirations for the emerging India. And we said that we will provide equality of status and of opportunity. We will ensure justice, social, economic, and political. We brought in fraternity. We brought in... When you think about all these dimensions, what we're doing today, in the beginning of the 75th year of the Constitution of India, is to the vision that was outlined and ties in the Constitution by Dr. Ambedkar and the Constituent Assembly, whether we have lived up to that promise in independent India. I will just take one question for each of them, and then we will see whether some other cross questions can emerge, and then I will throw it open to the audience. But my request to the audience right away, formulate your questions right now, let them be very, very crisp, and that way we can use this hour as fully as we can. So let me start with Professor Jayati Ghosh. Now, when we talked about economic equality, economic justice, right? The moment that we are living in right now is one where the billionaires are getting richer. We are also feeding 83 crore people, on a daily basis. So what happened to that constitutional vision? And is there something, and this is the other point, is there something that we can still do to fix and change the trajectory?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, you can hear me now, yes. Well, thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here in this amazingly organized convention, and with it is such a pleasure to be here in this really, really impressively organized convention, and with such an impressive panel as well. Yes, to consider your question, what is remarkable about the Indian economy, in some ways we're quite unique, really, is that we have managed to get a reputation for being globally one of the higher growth economies, especially in the last 30 years, without delivering any of the things that growth is supposed to deliver to the people. And in fact, if we go back to the Constitution, there are, as you brilliantly outlined in the preamble itself, but let's look at the directive principles. There are some fundamental, there are some propositions about rights that it guarantees, okay? There is, for example, the right to food in terms of the right to life. There is the right to health. There's the right to work. There's the right to education. There's the right to a decent life and social security. Now, in everything except perhaps education, and Anurag, I'm sure we'll talk more about that, we have really fallen very, very far behind the bar. And I would argue that it's kind of related. The reason we haven't fallen so far behind is really because we haven't delivered on that other fundamental issue in terms of the right to work and to decent conditions of work and to proper remuneration for work and to access to work without discrimination. And that to me is fundamental. And it reflects a broader failure of the Indian development trajectory, which is the inability to move workers out of low productivity activities into higher value-added activities. So there is a deep question there, how come, after all these decades of growth under different kinds of regimes, planning regimes, market-oriented regimes, etc., we did not deliver that. But what is also disturbing is that in the last decade in particular, we've seen a backtracking. We are seeing a worsening in terms of many of these essential features. And I would argue that it's really because of the pattern of our employment and because successive governments, and particularly, in fact, what we've experienced in the last decade, are not concerned with employment. They're looking only at aggregate economic activity, at GDP growth, and they're not looking at employment and improving the quantity and quality of employment, which is, of course, a huge economic loss. But most of all, it is a failure to meet all of these other rights, and it translates into all of these other rights. So we have a pattern of development that relies on unpaid and underpaid work. The unpaid work of women, only 12% of women above the age of 15 work for any remuneration, and yet about 86% are working in unpaid forms, therefore contributing to the economy. Most of our workers are massively underpaid in informal activities, very low payment, self-employment, etc. And most of them have terrible conditions of work, which are worsening. That's because our focus is on a model which says we will encourage and incentivize large capital, and it doesn't matter if that means a little bit of cronyism here and there, and that will trickle down to the rest of the economy. It does not trickle down, it has not trickled down. We should instead be thinking of what Hyman Minsky called a bubbling up of growth. Generate the employment, generate decent conditions, provide these basic social services, food, nutrition, education, health, etc., and that generates the economic growth.
I have a follow-up question for you, multiple ones as a matter of fact. One, during the first wave of COVID, we saw the plight of the migrant workers, right? So there is actually a lot of action happening without anyone actually doing anything about it. People are finding their places to work, right? And there, the conditions may be terrible, as you point out, as we saw when they were asked to walk back. That's one side, right? Migration, the gig economy, and the conditions which are emerging out there. And the third point is the one about women that you brought in. What would it take? You know, it could possibly transform our economy if more women were to formally be part of the workforce. So on these three dimensions, any thoughts? There's a lot.
So, you know, the whole thing about migrants, we don't know exact numbers, but the estimates are what, 150 million, maybe up to 200 million people who really have traveled for work. And then work, as we've seen, in very, very difficult and insecure conditions. And in the pandemic, you could actually stop livelihoods for a period of 3 months, completely without any warning for all of these people, which is why we had all these massive tragedies of this big migrations back home and so on. But it speaks to the fact that we're not offering any social protection. We're one of the few countries in the world that offered nothing in terms of compensation for that loss of income, except for a small amount of free food to only those who are defined under a very, very old, under a decade-old registration of who is poor. So yes, migrants, out of desperation, they will travel wherever they can to find work. That's not a sign of dynamism in the economy. It's the sign that we're not generating that growth from below. Distress migration, absolutely. Your second question was about the gig economy. So, you know, here's the thing. We talk about the gig economy because now the West has suddenly discovered this. We've always had a gig economy. What is a gig economy? It's when the worker bears the entire brunt of the risks of production. Half of our workers are self-employed. Another 30% are casual workers. They are completely at the mercy of the economic waves of that time. And so they don't have any security. So we've always had a gig economy. It's just that now we have some more slightly modern 21st century versions of them, the Uber drivers and the delivery boys and so on and so forth. But, you know, and women, again, you know, we are, I think, probably unique in the world. We have a women's workforce participation rate that is on par with Saudi Arabia. And yet we are supposedly growing at this very rapid rate. Very few countries in the world, especially our neighbors in Asia, have had this massive rate of growth without getting more women into the recognized workforce. And it's because we actually utilize their unpaid work in so many different ways, and that we're not generating enough jobs in the basic system. So our focus has to shift, as you say, what can we do about it? Our focus has to shift to job generation. And among the most employment generating things are precisely health, education, sanitation, you know, improving the basic conditions of life around you in urban and rural areas, etc. There is so much work that has to be done, which isn't done. And there are so many people who need to work, who cannot get jobs. So we need to dramatically expand public services. It's a very important way of generating secondary multiplier effects. You employ those people, they get incomes, they have demand, they buy stuff. Other people then emerge to provide them goods and services. So really, there is a solution. There is a way of doing this. It's just that the focus of the government has to shift.
Thank you, thank you. I'll turn now to our sociologists. So when we think about other dimensions, equality of status and of opportunity, Article 16 on reservations and things like that, if you think along those lines of the social groups that exist in society, the Article 15 against discrimination, and you know, those promises that were held out in the Constitution, how have we fared in the 75 years? And what, again, would you suggest that we can still do to up the ante, up the trajectory and pace of growth?
Thank you very much, Mr. Gowda. Thank you, Krishna Raj, for inviting us. And I'm very happy to see Anand sitting amongst us. Really very glad to see him here. I think this is a very, very important question. Normally, we tend to look at social as something that is kind of connected to economic. It obviously is connected to economic, but it is not another aspect of economic. I think in Indian case, particularly when we are talking about constitution and social group, there's also a different kind of, what one should say, trajectory that we need to recognize and emphasize on. So I think India, at the time of independence, we became a nation state, but we did not really have a movement for freedom of the kind that West had when it introduced liberal constitutions and democracy. We had a nationalist movement which was talking about freedom of the country from foreigners and replaced by Indian kind of, leaders. So I think in that context, Indian constitution was a unique kind of development in the world. On the one hand, we brought in a liberal constitution which promised citizenship to every individual when there was very little demand for it from below. And at the same time, I think our constitution makers were brave enough and wise enough and kind of, they recognized in some sense collective marginalities. Like earlier liberal constitutions don't recognize collective marginalities in terms of social groups. And what constitution does is that by putting those marginalities as collective marginalities in the constitution, you kind of produce a legitimacy for their claims over citizenship rights. And I think that's something which is unique to India. And I think that's where in first 40, 50 years, you have a very significant transformative moment which is brought by democracy and by inclusion of these social groups as legitimate claimers of those resources because they have experienced historical disadvantage. And that has in some sense transformed those groups, and they don't make claims over these resources as kind of in terms of patronage. They look at it as their rights and they see their marginality as a result of discrimination, active discrimination. And I think that is a very, very important transformative kind of process this constitution has unleashed. There are obviously other processes which are producing different kinds of dimensions. Now, what has happened in last 50, 60, 70 years is that this needs to be revisited. So within those groups also there are significant churnings happening. And collective groups are also undergoing major transformation because of all those economic processes. For example, some of the lower OBCs are falling down. Some of the SC communities are no longer, in some sense, as disprivileged. So I think this case about caste census is very well made out because you can't go with these categories. Otherwise, these categories have the danger, which is already happening, of turning them into identity politics. And identity politics has its own kind of divisive process. And my final point is that there's another thing that we need to kind of, we are witnessing particularly in the last 10, 15 years, and that is a new kind of populism. And this populist politics is in some sense turning the whole thing again in a reverse direction by bringing in this whole question of, delivery through clientelism. And this is happening everywhere. This is happening in cities, this is happening in villages. Earlier people could make claims over their rights as groups. Now economy is getting privatized. There's a new kind of state welfareism which is coming in form of schemes. And these schemes are mediated through political actors, and political actors have their own hierarchy of clienteles, and therefore the welfare schemes are being distributed as personalized patronage. And this personalized patronage, in some sense, then again kind of the language of rights becomes marginal to this clientele kind of claim making through intermediaries, where everyone is kind of fixed through another patronage, through bureaucracy. So there's a lot of welfare money that is coming to villages, for example. But rural welfareism is distributed through clientele actors, which are then connected through vote promises. The category of Labharthi is a good example of that. It's also a very humiliating category. It doesn't kind of translate into as a rights question. So I think that is where I think the challenge lies in, at one level, structurally understanding the internal differentiation which is happening within social groups and confronting that scientifically with data, with state policy, with discourse of rights.
So just to push that a little further, your basic point is that there has been impact of the constitutional promise and how we've taken it forward. But it's been uneven, and we need to find out. That's why we need a caste census. Who has benefited and who has not. And within every group, of course, you will find large numbers of people who have not been at the forefront of receiving the benefits. But there is also, see, for example, Anurag comes from an organization that is set up by a private sector philanthropist, right? There's, all the promises that were made in the Constitution were focused on the government sector. Government schools, reservations in government schools, reservations in government jobs, reservations in political representation. But the emerging frontier is the private sector. What do you think we need to do? Should there be some assessment of what's happening there? And should there be some intervention? Or should we just say, we've done enough and let the market take care of itself? Where do we go?
In a sense, that's very unfortunate. I mean, Indian private sector is self-obsessed in a very different manner. Unlike, in West, there is some notion of guilt, some notion of, and in some sense, in post-liberalization period, the Indian middle class has also become guilt-free because they see that, we are hardworking, meritorious people, and other people are those who are in government jobs. They have all come from quotas. But I think the point that is significant is that because of this internal differentiation that you also say that there are some groups who are doing well, others are not doing very well. And I think there are also new opportunities which are opening up. Say, for example, Azim Premji also has certain kind of, fellowships which they give to people coming from marginalized groups. So there are sections of those categories, groups which were earlier given reservations. Say, for example, somebody who has to go to IIT. IITs did not have reservations earlier. Now they have. ISERs did not exist. So who would go there? A person who is a child of an agricultural laborer is unlikely to sustain herself in an IIT. So you have this upwardly mobile middle class coming from reserved categories. They have certain kind of quotas where they can focus, they can go to. That's why I'm saying we need lots of active engagement with data. And what are the sectors which you leave for people for whom the first step is also not being climbed on the ladder? And they are staying back. They are not really able to move, and they are kind of getting pushed further down on the margin. And they are losing this language of rights because those jobs are no longer available. Lower level jobs are all privatized through kind of, contractors and stuff like that. So I think we need to look at, as again, going back to what Jayati was saying, employment is not simply employing one individual for wage. Employment is also a kind of starting of a process of social mobility, attaining dignity, education. All these things are related to the final question is question of citizenship and question of citizen making. How do we make citizens in this country which is hopelessly excluded, which is actively discriminating, which is obsessed with status, which is completely divided its cities, its villages, and in some sense those divisions are kind of growing. And I think this is something that we need to be very, very worried about. We should not turn into another South Africa.
Thank you, Professor Jyotka. I'll now turn to Professor Himanshu. More than 50% of our population still live off the land, agriculture in one way or the other. I'll give this back to you. And there are, the rural-urban divide is worsening continuously, widening continuously. And when we hear or when we stop collecting statistics on farmer suicides, we are in denial about that tragic outcome where we've not been able to fulfill these constitutional promises to more than half the population of India. So what's gone wrong? How do we fix it? Any reactions? What's your assessment of where we've been?
Thank you for asking this question. And I think one has to, with the border of Punjab and Haryana, and one farmer was killed, but 2 days, young farmer, two of them actually have been killed. And one of the questions that was asked to me, by an economist in the sense, that what is this whole demand about the MSP or other things? I said it's not a demand about MSP, it is not a demand about subsidies, it is not a demand about money. The farmers are today fighting the battle to preserve the constitution. And in fact, remember our constitution fathers, they basically said the constitution is only as good as the people who are implementing it are meant to protect it. Today what we have seen over the years is a slow and steady erosion in the kind of values that the constitution actually started with. And the rural areas and the farmers are a good example of that. This is something which has happened in the field of economic condition of farmers. They bear the brunt of it. They are 50% of it. But more than that, during the entire pandemic, when people moved from urban areas, the workers who were pushed out from urban areas, where did they go? They went to rural areas. It was the agriculture sector which gave them jobs, protected them, kept them, and they allowed them, and they felt comfortable, they felt secure in going to those places. But today, that is a sector which has been neglected for a long period of time, and I'm not saying only the last 10 years, it has been a long period where their condition has actually deteriorated over a period of time. The last data that we have is the income in cultivation is actually declining, and that is the official NSSO data. And Professor Gowda rightly pointed out, we are not likely to have any more surveys, because any survey which shows things are not good is basically killed. So we might not know. But as of now, the data says that by 2018-19, income from cultivation for majority of the farmers has come down. Whether you look at it from Niti Aayog method or look at it from the National Sample Survey, the point is not that the income has come down. Point is that what are we doing as far as the agriculture sector is concerned. And I think in that sense, it is the agriculture sector today may not be the only sector which is the dominant sector in the rural areas. A lot of agriculture farmers are now in the non-agriculture sector. They are also participating in wage work. The non-farm is a significant part of the rural economy. And in all of them, there has been a consistent attack in as far as the conditions of work are concerned, the opportunities of employment diversification are there, the possibility of farmers to use new technology or to have greater investment in agriculture. And I think those things need to be strengthened. And I think the demand that the farmers are making in that sense has to be seen in terms of a promise that was made to them. And the promise was that their MSPs, for example, the system that we're talking about, will be something that will be provided. Why do we need to have a protest to say that the government should be doing what it is actually promising? This is a demand which is really a demand of saying that, look, if you are putting something on paper and you are basically announcing something on paper, then just follow it up. But this is where I think the problem is that the problem has been turned on its head. Instead of talking about the inefficiency of the government in not living up to its promise that it makes every year, the question has now been put to the farmers as to why are you asking something which you do not deserve. And I think that is the problem that we are facing. That today they have become the victims, they are the culprits, they are the ones who are basically being asked questions which should be asked to the government. And I will give two more examples of it. How the rural areas have basically become a pocket of distress, they're basically where deprivation is now being perpetuated through various forces. Two examples. One example is we have a constitutional guarantee of minimum wages. It did not apply to the private sector, that is fine. But at least the government sector was not supposed to violate it. You cannot violate the Minimum Wages Act. What did the government do? The government basically coined a word called honorarium. So you now have 48 million women workers, the most vulnerable workers, who are told that you are not workers. You are going to get, you are volunteers. You are doing contribution to the nation building. We will give you 1,500 rupees because that is an honorarium for nation building. You are not to be treated as. So the basic distinction, the dignity of being called a worker has been taken away to 48 million workers who take care of your entire responsibility of health, education, nutrition, and various other social services. During the COVID, and this is something which is unheard of, a number of chief ministers came and said that why don't we increase the working hours to 12 hours? And probably it took 100 years for workers to get the right to work for 8 hours a day, to reduce the number of working hours. And today what we are seeing is that the whole discussion of 12 hours is not something where people are worried about or even thinking about it, to the extent that somebody went ahead and said that the young generation should work for 18 hours a day. That was also being talked about. And again, something that people were defending it. I think the attack is on the constitution, be it the farmers, is the workers, women and others. And the rural areas are a good example of it, where everything and anything that you continue to, that goes as far as the protection of the constitution is concerned.
So two quick follow-up questions. One on agriculture. In places like Punjab, you're going to see desertification, salination, the practices are such that there are going to be no livelihoods there in agriculture, maybe in a decade's time. And there doesn't seem to be any political will to bring about change in those domains. That's one part. The second part, since you talked about workers, right? There is the freedom of association, another fundamental right. The whole workers' movements, trade unions, feel free to pitch in here if you like, all of those have become weak or marginalized or irrelevant as the economy marches on in its own way. And in the process, what happens to, to the balancing of power and, various other aspects that were part of the underlying promise of the Constitution?
It's a quick answer to both the questions. The first one is that, remember the fight, I mean, this is where the farmer leaders are very clear. They said that we want to diversify. We want to move away from the paddy circle. And providing a guaranteed MSP is something which will allow us to move into other crops which are more going to cost less capital, they're going to cost less, use less water and all of these issues. It's the population which is the farmers who are asking for it. It is the government which is saying that no, you continue to grow paddy even though your area is not suited for cultivation of paddy. So look at the whole thing, that this is something which is such a perverse kind of a situation that we have come into it. And the second, I think, is where it's a much larger question of it. And I have never agreed to that fighting for workers' right is only the job of the trade unions. It is something which is the job of the society. It is a constitutional right, and I don't think we can only expect trade unions to talk about workers' right. It is our job. In fact, all our workers' right were introduced not just by the trade unions, but it was also by our constitution makers. In fact, Baba Saheb Ambedkar was as much a trade unionist as he was an activist on various other things. He started the Labour League and various other things. And I think his concern for these workers' rights came from an understanding of dignity of work as a constitutional value. And I think that dignity we are losing, and we are basically reducing the concept of work to a menial, which is, I think, a problem.
Thank you, Professor Himanshu. Anurag, Bengaluru, and we should be good hosts. Anyway, now, when we talk about equality of status and opportunity, I would say that depending on which school your parents put you into at the age of 3 or something like that, that determines your future in this country. That essentially the promise that's there in the Constitution does not actually get realized in fair measure. There is a certain amount of mobility thanks to education, but the inequalities that are spawned by unequal educational opportunities are really practically insurmountable. There's another supplementary side to this, which is we talk about a demographic dividend, but our people aren't equipped and skilled. Skilling is also a narrow sense. I would use the word empowered to be able to partake of economic opportunity. And so what happened? Can we fix this?
Thank you. Thanks, Rajeev. I hope you can hear my voice at the back. You can? Okay, all right. So thank you so much. And permit me to start with a story, if that's okay with you. Because I've got 4 eminent academics here. I'm sorry, Rajeev, you got many hats. So you can hear my story. I'm very worried about the air conditioning. Huh? It's keeping us comfortable, but it's also sort of disturbing the acoustics. You're able to hear me? Okay. So, I spent 1 week of my life either in Bangalore or in Delhi. And the other week of my life, I spent somewhere in the rural areas of Rajasthan or Uttarakhand or West Bengal or Assam or somewhere. One such visit, somewhere, a very hot summer day, I went to a school. And most of these visits, I'm spending time in schools. So I went to a school. It was a class 8th class. 25, 30 kids. And because I'm used to handling children, I can sort of entertain them very quickly. So it's like saying, when they say, what's your name? I tell them, my name is Narendra Modi, right? And then that's, of course, gets them rolling in laughter. So anyhow, they were very, very happy with the interaction. And then one of the kids asked me, it's a government school, by the way. One of the kids asked me, "Sir, आप मुसलमान हो क्या?" तो I said कि क्यों पूछ क्यों रहे हो यो? क्यों पूछ रहे हो कि मैं मुसलमान हूं कि नहीं? They said, "सर आपकी दाढ़ी है." तो आपकी दाढ़ी है इसलिए पूछ रहा हूं. तो मैंने कहा, I said, I hope most people understand a smattering of Hindi. तो मैंने कहा, हाँ हाँ मैं मुसलमान हूं. They shouted in protest. They said, नहीं सर आप मुसलमान हो ही नहीं सकते. मैंने कहा क्यों? कहते हैं सर आप तो अच्छे आदमी हो, आप मुसलमान कैसे हो सकते हो? ठीक है? So, hold on. Hold on. I left that school, 20 kilometers from that particular school, 20 kilometers from that particular school. I'm not talking about going from one state to the other. That's not what I'm talking about. 20 kilometers from the school, I went into another school. I went in, as I was walking in, there was a chabutra, this high. And there was this tree, the banyan tree, our banyan tree. And there were two small girls who were swinging on the banyan tree. And when I was going in, they said to me, "Stop, ruko." So I stopped. I mean, two 4-year-old girls telling you to stop swinging from the banyan tree. I stopped. They said, "Upar aao." So they called me up from the stairs. They said, "Namaskar karo." So there was a mazar. So, I prayed at the mazar. Then I went out. I said, "तुम लोग का नाम क्या है?" एक कहती है लक्ष्मी, दूसरी कहती है मेरी. Then I went into the school and I had this similar interaction with the kids in that school. And something happened. And I said, why is democracy so important? आपको पसंद आएगी बात. Why is democracy so important? They said that democracy is so important because democracy gives equality. हर आदमी बराबर होता है. So I said, अच्छे आदमी और बुरे आदमी भी बराबर होते हैं. They said, नहीं सब अच्छे होते हैं. So I said, क्या बात कर रहे हो? सब लोग अच्छे होते हैं. हाँ सब लोग अच्छे होते हैं. मैंने कहा मुसलमान भी अच्छे होते हैं. हंसने लगे. Started laughing. कहते हैं सर आप क्या बेवकूफ़ी की बातें कर रहे हैं? सब लोग अच्छे होते हैं. वो मज़ार वाले बाबा जो थे वो मुसलमान थे और वो दुनिया के सबसे अच्छे आदमी थे. So I came back. I came out. Of course, Lakshmi and Mary were there, swinging on the banyan tree. And when I was going, they said, "Stop, come back. Mazar pe prayer karo, uske baad jao." Then they let me off. Now, when I wrote about this, I think 4.5 years ago. My friends told me, "You're making it up. Huh? You're making it up. How is it possible? How is it possible that the first incident happened, the second incident happened, and in the second incident, didn't you make up the name of the two girls, Lakshmi and Mary? Were they not swinging on some other tree, not the banyan tree?" But they were. I didn't make it up. That is India in 20 kilometers. But the reason I tell you the story is that's the promise of education. That is the promise of education. That's the promise of public education. So when we talk about education and that leading to economic opportunities, and of course, Rajeev, you're 100% right. If a child were to go into the first school, irrespective of what happens subsequently in their life, what society, a citizen is she going to create, right? And in the second school, what is the kind of society that she is going to create? So indeed, the school, the fact is most people don't have any choices. They will just send to the school that is nearby, right? So there is no question that I think the promise of school education is not just economic. The promise of school education is the promise of our constitution. The great man whose picture is behind, Baba Sahib Ambedkar, he said this, he wrote this. He said, "I owe my entire intellectual life to one man." And that one man was John Dewey. Dewey famously said that public education is the foundation of a democracy. So there is no question that the unfulfilled promises of school education lie in very many ways at the unfulfilled base of our democracy. But I'm not despondent I'm not despondent because in the same 20 kilometers, you see the possibility. India, as Joan Robinson said, Jayati, you must have known her. Yeah. So you heard it from Joan Robinson said that whatever you say of India is true, and its exact opposite is also true, right? Something like that. So, yeah, Rajeev.
Thank you. So basically, those of you who came here for a data analytic, exposition on Constitution and its promise, I don't think we've looked at that. We've looked at a more impressionistic approach to these big questions, but that's more because we are constrained by time. We have about 14 minutes for audience questions. Can people please raise their hands? We'll try and take a few very, very quickly, and then and then I'll leave it to the speakers to respond. Yeah. Are there people with mics and mics? Yeah. Just come here and speak while the mics are coming.
Hello. Can I ask, sir?
Yeah. Oh, you have the mics? Okay.
मैं हिंदी में पूछूंगा. दो ही वाक्य है.
संक्षिप्त में.
हाँ, दो वाक्य है सिर्फ. क्या डॉक्टर बाबा साहब अम्बेडकर संविधान लिखते समय शिक्षा और रोजगार का अधिकार डायरेक्टिव प्रिंसिपल्स में लिखने के बजाय फंडामेंटल राइट के रूप में देना चाहते थे, और आज दूसरा वाक्य, हमारा संगठन ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट की डिमांड कर रहा है कि शिक्षा और रोजगार फंडामेंटल राइट बने, तो क्या ये सही है?
We'll take a bunch of questions and then we'll try and respond. Okay. Next. Yeah, it's standing right there.
Sir, good afternoon, sir. I am Manjunath. When it comes to the improving the earning of a farmer, the income earning improvement of a farmer and the inflations are in conflict. Okay. So how with the policy level will we be able to resolve this?
Got it. Okay. There's somebody. Yeah, we'll send the mic back, please. There
Hello.
are women at the back.
हेलो, मेरा नाम चावड़ा लोकेश है. मैं घुमंतू भट के लोगों का अध्यक्ष हूँ, घुमंतू भट कर्नाटक का. सर, मैं ये पूछ रहा हूँ, अभी 75 साल के हम आज़ादी मिल गया, फिर कर्नाटका में मिल के और इंडिया में घुमंतू भट के लोगों को अभी तक आज़ादी नहीं मिला. अभी 75 साल हो गया, फिर भी आज घुमंतू भट के लोग बिना एड्रेस नहीं से जी रहे हैं. किसी भी एक हमको एक सोशल जस्टिस का नाम पे भी एक कार्यक्रम नहीं है. अभी मैं बोल रहा हूँ, बहुत लोग, मैं 80% से लोग, ये क्या जनसंख्या है उसमें 8% है. बालकृष्ण रेन के दिए है, दाते साहब रिपोर्ट दिया है. फिर भी आज ये इंडिया में हमें बिना एड्रेस से जी रहा है. इसका बारे में आपका प्रोग्राम क्या है? ये 75 साल का ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का प्रोग्राम में आप बताने चाहिए बस.
Good afternoon, panelists. Good afternoon, everybody present here. I have a question for Professor Jayati. In the starting, she mentioned that she was talking about the economic opportunities. So I would like to ask, she mentioned that we should focus more on creating employment among the lower sections, more on creating the economic opportunities rather than on things like GDP. But ma'am, don't you think both these things go hand in hand? If we focus on creating opportunities on the lower level, it will indirectly impact the GDP of the country. So it is quite beneficial. So I would like to you to throw some light on this topic as well. Thank you.
I think we've got 4. I'm not sure we can remember them if we take more. So why don't we just respond right away to these 4 questions that have come.
No, I mean, the question on farmers' income and inflation, in fact, can you hear me? Yeah. In fact, the providing income support or MSP support to the farmers is the best way to deal with the inflation. What have been we doing? And I think there has been recently, at least in the last 20 years, there have been episodes of inflation, all of them driven by food inflation. The government has basically not bothered about looking at the supply side or the structural issues and only used the monetary policies. the monetary policies, when they're being used to control inflation, have been ineffective. It has been taking some time to come to it. And at the cost of economies, cost of capital going up and growth being slowing down, all of these issues happening. In fact, if you provide price stability, which is where the MSP thing comes in, then it is one instrument which takes care of farmers' income, and it is also something will give you price stability both for producers as well as consumers. Remember, when the prices are below MSP, that is the time the government intervenes. It buys those commodities, keeps it in stocks, and when the prices are rising, it offloads in the market. It is a demand-supply mismatch that the MSP system can produce. Consumer price stability, producer price stability, as well as income support. I think it has to be looked at from that point of view. So it's not in conflict. It is actually a complementary tool that the government should be using for income support, inflation control, as well as for maintaining price stability in the economy.
Okay, should I? Yeah, so yes, very quickly, you're absolutely right that yes, focusing on employment generation will generate more growth. But it may not be necessarily very rapid growth that you would get by encouraging, let's say, some corporate investment in some very big ticket investments and so on. I think that what I was really trying to say is this. Focusing on growth will not get you employment. We have had a decade of 5 to 7% rate of growth in GDP with zero employment growth, with actually a decline in paid employment. Okay? So obviously just growth is not going to give you GDP. Focusing on employment generation will give you GDP. May not be as high necessarily, but it will definitely give you GDP increases. But more than that, it will actually improve the conditions of most of your population. I completely agree that the right to education should be a fundamental right. I agree that the right to social security should be a fundamental right. I mean, the issue of why it ended up in directive principles, those have a lot to do with the debates of that time and the pushback that was received when they were conceived of as rights. But I do believe that, yes, they should definitely be seen as fundamental rights.
ನೀವು ಮಾತನಾಡಿದ್ದು nomadic groups ಬಗ್ಗೆನಾ? ಅಲೆಮಾರಿ, right. Yeah, it is about.
प्रॉब्लम यह है कि जो हमारा देश बना, भारतवर्ष, नेशन स्टेट इंडिया, सो हमारा जो देश बना भारतवर्ष, वो एक पॉलिटिकल टेरिटरी था और वो समाज के तौर पे हमारा जो समाज है वो बाबा साहब ने भी बोला था कि बहुत क्रूअल और एक्सक्लूजनरी समाज है, लोगों को बाहर निकालता है। थोड़े से लोग हैं जो उस पर अपना एकदम से अपनी मलकियत समझते हैं। तो उसी लिए जो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का वैल्यू ये था कि स्टेट के थ्रू और पॉलिटिक्स के थ्रू उसमें बराबरी का एक नया जज्बा लाना था समाज में। और वो हुआ क्या है कि उन दोनों के बीच में एक नया जो पूंजीवाद का जिस तरह से विकास हुआ है हमारे यहाँ पे, और पूंजीवाद ने एक नया तरह का एक भाषा हमारे बीच में लेके आए कि आप आगे जाएंगे। एजुकेशन में भी उसका एक खास तरह का कल्टीवेशन होता है कि आप अकेले मेहनत करेंगे, मेहनत करके आगे निकल जाएंगे, आप बड़े आदमी बन जाएंगे, बड़ी औरत बन जाएंगे। तो उससे होता क्या है कि हमारे जो एक्सक्लूजनरी रियलिटीज़ है, हमारे समाज का जो सच्चाई है, जो लोग मार्जिन पे बैठे हैं वो उस स्कूल में नहीं जा सकते जहाँ के लोग मेरिट लेते हैं और आगे चले जाते हैं। हालांकि जो नैरेटिव है, जो मार्केट का है, जो पूंजीवाद का नैरेटिव है, जो वो सच्चाई है आज की, वो उस चीज़ को रिकग्नाइज करने को तैयार ही नहीं है। आपने मेहनत नहीं किया होगा इसलिए आप आगे नहीं गए। तो इसीलिए वो जो ग्रुप को रिकग्नाइज करके उनको एक स्पेशल एफर्ट करके आगे लेके आना और उनको ये रियलाइज करना कि ये आपका हक है, वो कहीं ना कहीं से धीमा पड़ गया है। वो काफ़ी देर तक हमारे समाज में चला और मेरे को लगा है कि आज के दिन में हमारा समाज पहले से ज़्यादा खुला है। इसीलिए अधिकार की बात कर रहे हैं हम, इसीलिए प्रजातंत्र की बात कर रहे हैं, इसीलिए हम यहाँ बैठ के सोच रहे हैं। तो एक पॉजिटिव साइड ये है कि पॉलिटिकली लोगों में एस्पिरेशन बढ़ा है और वो उसको चुपचाप करके सहने वाले नहीं हैं। पहले लोग मार्जिन पे बैठे थे, वहीं बैठे रहते थे। अब हर मार्जिन के लोगों के 2-4 लोग पढ़ लिख गए हैं, वो फिर आके सोचते हैं कि हाँ भाई जब तक मेरा समाज मेरे साथ नहीं आएगा मेरे यहाँ होने का कोई फ़ायदा नहीं है, तो उसकी भी बात करने लगे हैं। तो एक अलग अलग तरह से कॉम्प्लेक्सिटीज़ हैं और हर रीजन का, हर कम्युनिटी का, जैसे एक अलग अलग तरह की जो डी नोटिफाइड कम्युनिटीज़ हैं उनमें भी बहुत अलग अलग के डिफरेंसेस हैं। एसटी में भी बहुत अलग अलग डिफरेंसेस हैं, एससी में भी बहुत अलग अलग डिफरेंसेस हैं। इसके लिए जो बात कर रहे हैं बार बार के डेटा की बहुत ज़रूरत है। सरकार जब तक उन रियलिटीज़ के साथ एंगेज नहीं करेगी, एकदम उनको कन्फ्रंट नहीं करेगी, वो सच्चाई बनी रहेगी और वो और भी ज़्यादा बिगड़ेगी.
The lady at the back first, yes.
हेलो यस
Yes, yes.
मेरा नाम पल्लवी है, एडवोकेट. आई एम एडवोकेट पल्लवी. मैं महाराष्ट्र से आई हूँ. मेरा सवाल इन्हीं के साथ थोड़ा सा जुड़ा हुआ है जो डिनोटिफाइड एंड नोमैडिक ट्राइब्स के बारे में बात कर रहे थे. तो उनका सवाल सिंपल था कि जो बेसिक एमिनिटीज़ और बेसिक हक है जो जिनको मिलने चाहिए, वो हक अभी तक डीएनटीज़ को नहीं मिले हुए हैं. तो जैसे मुझे एक बात पूछनी थी. जैसे शेड्यूल कास्ट, शेड्यूल ट्राइब्स, ओबीसीज, माइक्रो ओबीसीज के बारे में बात की जाती है, तब हमेशा नोमैडिक एंड डीनोटिफाइड ट्राइब्स ये लेफ्ट आउट होते हैं, जबकि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ने उन्हें भी जीने का हक दिया है. अगर हम आज और कल के सेमिनार के बारे में भी बात करेंगे तो उसका एजेंडा देखेंगे तो उसमें एससीज के बारे में बात हो रही है, एसटीज के बारे में बात हो रही है, ओबीसीज के बारे में बात हो रही है, पर डीएनटीज के बारे में बात नहीं हो रही है. तो सवाल ये है कि जब हम संविधान को मानते हैं और संविधान मानने वाले लोग अगर एक प्रोग्राम, एक एक्शन प्लान लेके जाना चाहते हैं, लोगों में अवेयरनेस क्रिएट करना चाहते हैं, तब एक बड़ा तबका जो है वो हमसे भी कहीं छूट रहा है. तो ये क्यों हो रहा है? कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल सेफगार्ड्स जो दूसरों लोगों को मिल रहे हैं, 20% पॉपुलेशन देश की डीएनटीज की है और वो कमीशन ने बताया हुआ है 2008 में गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया को. तो अभी तक वो नहीं हो पा रहा है. तो मुझे सिर्फ इतना पूछना है कि ये इंक्लूसिव जब हम बात करते हैं तो हम इनको कैसे इंक्लूड कर सकते हैं अपने प्रोग्राम में? थैंक यू.
नहीं, बिल्कुल सही है आपकी बात. 2 लेवल पे आंसर हैं. एक तो ऐसे इंक्लूड करते हैं जैसे आपने किया, खड़े होकर नारा लगाना जरूरी है, हाथ उठाना जरूरी है कि हम भी हैं, हमारी बात भी कीजिए. तो बिल्कुल यही तरीका है, डेमोक्रेसी में यही होता है. वो जब तक बोलना शुरू कर देंगे. दूसरा एक सब्सटैंटिव लेवल ये है कि जो डीनोटिफाइड ट्राइब्स हैं वो माइक्रो माइनॉरिटीज़ हैं. हर जगह पे कहीं पे उनके 5,000 लोग हैं, कहीं पे 25,000 लोग हैं, कहीं पे 2 लाख लोग हैं. उनके अंदर जो एक यूनिटी वाला जो एक कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंसी नहीं बना, वो इलेक्टोरल पॉलिटिक्स में, डेमोक्रेसी में नंबर्स बहुत मैटर करते हैं. और उनके अंदर एक मध्यम वर्ग पैदा नहीं हुआ जो उस डिमांड को आर्टिकुलेट करके आगे ला सके. लेकिन तरीका तो यही है जो आपने कहा.
Thanks. Next question, please.
Hello, sir.
Bani. Yeah, go ahead. After him, the man at the back, and then the lady in front, or vice versa. Go ahead.
ನನ್ನ ಹೆಸರು JN ನಾಗೇಂದ್ರ ಅಂತೇಳಿ. ಜೈ ಭೀಮ್. ಮ್ಯಾನ್ಯುವಲ್ ಸ್ಕ್ಯಾವೆಂಜರ್ಸ್ 2013 ಆ್ಯಕ್ಟ್ 2013 ಆ್ಯಕ್ಟ್ ಪ್ರಕಾರವಾಗಿ 10 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಮ್ಯಾನ್ಯುವಲ್ ಸ್ಕ್ಯಾವೆಂಜರ್ಸನ್ನು ಸರ್ವೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ಫಲಾನುಭವಿಗಳು ಈಗಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಹೀನವಾಗಿ ಬದುಕ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರಲ್ಲ. ಕಾನೂನು ಇದೆ, ಸುಪ್ರೀಂ ಕೋರ್ಟ್ ಇದೆ, ಪ್ರಧಾನಮಂತ್ರಿಗಳು ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಪ್ರೆಸಿಡೆಂಟ್ಗಳು ಇದ್ದಾರಲ್ಲ. ಕಾನೂನು ಇರೋ ಪ್ರಕಾರವಾಗಿ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟಲ್ಲೂ ಸೌಲಭ್ಯಗಳ ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ಸುಪಯೋಗವಾಗಿ ಮಾಡಿಸ್ಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ 10 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಹೋರಾಟ ಮಾಡ್ತಾನೆ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. 10 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಅದರ ಸೌಲಭ್ಯಗಳನ್ನು ಮ್ಯಾನ್ಯುವಲ್ ಸ್ಕ್ಯಾವೆಂಜರ್ಸ್ಗೆ ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ಸಿಗ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಪೊಲಿಟಿಕಲ್ಸ್ ಪ್ರಕಾರವಾಗಿ ಏನಾಗ್ತಾ ಇದೋ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ.
ಇಲ್ಲ, ನೀವು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇರೋದು ನಿಜ. ಏನಾಗಿದೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಒನ್ ಲೆವೆಲ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಡಿನಯಲ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ.
ಹೌದು.
ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಪಾರ್ಲಿಮೆಂಟ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ ಮ್ಯಾನ್ಯುವಲ್ ಸ್ಕ್ಯಾವೆಂಜಿಂಗ್ ಡಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಎಕ್ಸಿಸ್ಟ್ ಇನ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ ಅಂತಾರೆ. ಓಕೆ, ಅದು ಫಸ್ಟ್. ಅದಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ ನಾವು ಪೇಪರ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಓದ್ತೀವಿ ಯಾರೋ ತೀರೋದ್ರು ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಅವ್ರ ಕುಟುಂಬಗಳಿಗೆ ಏನ್ ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅವೆಲ್ಲ
ಸೊನ್ನೆ.
ಅದೇ
ಎಲ್ಲ ಸೊನ್ನೆ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಅವರು ಅದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಕೆಳಗಡೆ ಹೋಗಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಓಕೆ,
ಸೊ ಇದು ನೀವು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇರೋದು ನಿಜ. ಇದು ಒಂದು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ. ಇದು ನಮ್ಮ ಸಂವಿಧಾನದ ಏನು ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಾಮಿಸ್ ಇತ್ತು, ನಿಜವಾಗ್ಲೂ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದು ಈ ಒಂದು ಕ್ಯಾಟಗರಿನಲ್ಲಿ. ಖಂಡಿತ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಸೊ ಮಚ್.
ತುಂಬಾ ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು.
ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ನಿಮಿಷ ಇರಿ ಸ್ವಾಮಿ, ಪ್ಲೀಸ್ ವಿಲ್ ಕಮ್ ಟು ಯು. ಬ್ಯಾಕ್ ದೇರ್ ಅಂಡ್ ದೆನ್ ದ ಲೇಡಿ ಇನ್ ಫ್ರಂಟ್, ಆರ್ either way. Whoever had the mic, come on.
Yeah. My name is Arvind Unni and I am working on urban. So this is a question, I mean, a wonderful panel, but the question is more future and forward looking and wanted to kind of take your perspective on that. So on urban, So on urban, our cities are hardly equitable, hardly based on justice, right? I mean, we see it all across. So our struggle has always been on right to housing, right to access to transport, right to basic service. A lot of things are not there, let's say, prescribed so much in the constitution in letter. But we feel that, do you think that we have done sort of a disservice to the promise of the constitution of effectively not utilizing the promise and extrapolating different, sort of ideas for different sectors? I'm talking about the urban. So in this space where this is...
Got it, boss.
So
yeah,
I just want your perspective on that.
Pass the mic on. Thank you, Arvind. Yeah.
So this is regarding the vocational education that has brought up in NEP. So my question is, what policy level steps are we taking towards the possibility of increase in inequality due to this vocational education, introduction of vocational education that would come up? Because mostly the educational status of most of the children is based upon their economic status, and providing the vocational education at early age would basically increase the gap between the vocational and non-vocational occupations and as well as education.
Thank you.
So,
Anurag, I'll just take the previous one and then I'll give you the mic to address this. So with regard to Arvind's question, housing has always been a problem in terms of discrimination. Villages are, housing in villages is caste-based, and there's a tremendous amount, just from where you live, which caste you come from and what your future possibilities and how they might be limited. That's what happened in village India. And that's why Baba Saheb said, move to the cities and get rid of all the other discrimination and prejudice that you find in rural India. But urban India is filled with gated communities and boarded neighborhoods in Ahmedabad, for example, just to make sure that it stays invisible, poverty and the conditions of the poorer populations. So we have certainly not fulfilled any constitutional guarantees there. There's another worse problem, the issue about discrimination, right? You have discrimination in housing. People will say single people can't come in, meat eaters can't come in. There's numerous other kinds of discrimination that you find, in urban housing as well. So we are far from addressing that issue, but, thanks for bringing it back to our attention. On the education front, you'll answer, and then there were one or two, or did we cover anything?
What? We have some time, is it? No, I'll do that. We have some time. Okay. You won't forgive me for that, is it? Okay. So, see, the thing is that let's start with some very basic things, which is vocational education, skilling, etc. None of it is a substitute for good basic education. So there's no point in talking about how good is vocational education, how good is higher education, what is so-called skilling, unless our fundamentals of basic education is sound. Language, math, analytical capacities, communication, social capacities, everything that I described in my story. I think that's very important, very, very important to put down there, We tend to miss that. So good basic education is the starting point, point one. Point two is that as far as the policy is concerned, all it is saying is that all children should be exposed to basic vocational education. All children. Unlike the past where vocational education was the choice of those who could not, quote unquote, go into the academic stream, now the policy is supposed to be implementing that all children go through vocational education, right? It's not implemented right now. But I want to go back to some of the discussion here. My work is in school education or a bit in higher education. See, we are way away from doing good education for our children. We know that. We are failing on everything that I talked about. We are doing it well somewhere in some schools. We are failing on foundational literacy and numeracy. But doing good education is not the solution for creating jobs. What Jayati said, you know, this notion that, okay, let's do better education and somehow jobs will happen. It will not happen, right? So the focus on creating good quality, just jobs is really a distinct issue. There is an interrelationship between the two of them, but if we keep focused on the matter of education and keep ignoring the matter of creation of jobs, and jobs before growth, I agree with her completely, we'll continue to miss the basic problem.
I'd also like to add that in the national education policy, they allow for people to leave at different stages with different certificates and degrees and research degrees, etc. My concern is that those who are poorer, those who are under more pressure to go into the workforce right away, will leave and will actually never come back, and you'll create a multi-tiered education-related employment opportunities, which is discrimination of another kind, right? That's another concern that we have. Heli sir, nimdu next question.
मैं कर्नाटक का हूँ, लेकिन मैं हिंदी में बात करना चाहता हूँ। मेरा नाम डीजी सागर, डॉक्टर डीजी सागर। दलित संघर्ष समिति में मैं 35 इयर्स से काम कर रहा है, लेकिन ये कर्नाटका सरकार जो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन और नेशनल यूनिटी के बारे में ये 2 दिन का ये कॉन्फ्रेंस करे,
आपका प्रश्न
मुबारक है। और दूसरा बात ये है, और पहले जितना भी क्वेश्चन उठाते हैं वो क्वेश्चन को ये समाज असमानता व्यवस्था का ऊपर है। समाज में सबको बराबर नहीं है, असमानता व्यवस्था है। असमानता व्यवस्था में मनुवाद है, ब्राह्मणशाही है, हिंदुत्व है। इसीलिए दलित, बैकवर्ड, माइनॉरिटी जो भी डिप्रेस क्लास है वो क्लास को दबाव गया है और उसको वंचित किया है। डॉक्टर बाबा साहब अम्बेडकर आने के बाद संविधान 75 इयर्स हो गए और जारी होने के बाद, और उसको एजुकेशन मिले, जॉब रिजर्वेशन मिले, हर को गौरव मिले, फिर भी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का जितना उसका एक्सपेक्टेशन थे अब उसको उतना नहीं मिलना चाहिए, नहीं मिले है। लेकिन क्यों बोले तो जितना भी रूलिंग करे यहाँ तक 75 इयर्स में 1952 से वो संविधान का जो भी है उसको दबाव के रखे है। ये लोगों को पास ये संविधान में क्या है, संविधान हिसाब से हमको क्या मिलने वाला है, वो सामान्य लोगों को मालूम नहीं है। इसीलिए एक नेशनल मूवमेंट होना चाहिए। अभी ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के बारे में हर घर को चलना चाहिए। इसी जितना भी क्वेश्चन उठाते वो क्वेश्चन को, लेकिन ये जात है, ये कैस्टिज्म है, वो दुनिया में इतना जुल्म हो गए इंडिया में, वो धर्म आधार पर और कास्ट आधार पर जितना डिफरेंस क्लास में जुल्म हुए उतना ज़्यादा कहीं भी इसमें नहीं है। इसीलिए ये संविधान हर सामान्य लोगों का पास संविधान क्या है, बाबा साहब क्या है, हमको क्या राइट्स मिले हैं, हमको क्या ड्यूटीज है, ये पूरा जो भी इंडिया में ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन सो जारी होना चाहिए।
Thank you, sir. That's a wonderful statement of action. Ilkodi Swami, last question here. Yeah, we'll close with this.
Sir, namaste. ರಾಜೇಶ್ ಅವಗಲ್ ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಕಲಬುರಗಿ. ಈಗ ದೇಶದ ಅಭಿವೃದ್ಧಿಯಲ್ಲಿ, ಸರ್ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ, ದೇಶದ ಅಭಿವೃದ್ಧಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಳಷ್ಟು ದೇಶದ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸರ್ಕಾರಗಳು ಬಂದರೂ ಏನಾದರೂ ಕೂಡ SC ST ಜನಾಂಗಕ್ಕೆ ಅಭಿವೃದ್ಧಿ, ಈಗ ಸರ್ ಡಿ ಜಿ ಸಾಗರ್ ಹೇಳ್ದಂಗೆ ಅಷ್ಟು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಪ್ರಮಾಣದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಭಿವೃದ್ಧಿ ಕಾಣಕ್ಕಾಗಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ 75 ವರ್ಷಗಳಾಯಿತು, ಅಮೃತ ಮಹೋತ್ಸವದ ದಶಕಗಳ ಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿ ಅದೀವಿ. ಸೊ ಮೀಸಲಾತಿಯಲ್ಲೇ ಬದಲಾವಣೆ ಅವಶ್ಯಕತೆ ಐತಾ? ಹಾಗಿದ್ರೆ ಏನು ಅವಶ್ಯಕತೆ ಬೇಕಾಗಿತ್ತು ಸರ್?
Okay, I'll quote pudi. Muxpudi, these two people standing there, let's just take their questions and be done with it, boss. Those two. Which one? Yeah, those two.
ರಾಜೀವ್ ಗೌಡ್ರೆ ಸರ್, ಎಲ್ಲ ಎಕನಮಿಸ್ಟು ಒಪ್ತಾರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶದ ಒಬ್ಬ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿಯ ತಲಾದಾಯ ಬರೀ 20 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಅಂತ. ಡಿ ಜಿ ಸಾಗರ್ ಅವರು ಹೇಳ್ದಂಗೆ ದಲಿತರು ಇವತ್ತು ಕೂಡ ನಾವು ಶೋಷಣೆಗೊಳಗಾಗಿದ್ದೀವಿ ಈ ಸಮಾಜದಲ್ಲಿ. ಇವತ್ತು ಹಳ್ಳಿನ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಪೇಟೆನ ಹುಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಉದ್ಯೋಗ ಅರಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ಪೇಟೆಗೆ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ, ಆಯ್ತಲ್ಲ. ಶಿಕ್ಷಣದಿಂದ ವಂಚಿತರಾಗಿದ್ದೀವಿ, ಉದ್ಯೋಗದಿಂದ ವಂಚಿತರಾಗಿದ್ದೀವಿ, ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕವಾಗಿ ಶೋಷಣೆಗೊಳಗಾಗಿದ್ದೀವಿ, ಇವತ್ತು ಕೂಡ ಅನುಭವಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಆದರೂ ಇವತ್ತು ಖಾಸಗೀಕರಣ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಉದ್ಯೋಗ ಸಿಗ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ, ನಾವು ಅಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ವಂಚಿತರಾಗ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಗುತ್ತಿಗೆ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರಾಗಿ ನಾವು ಮಾರ್ಪಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀವಿ, ಭೂಮಿ ಕಳ್ಕೊಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಯಾಕೆಂತಂದರೆ ಕಂಪ್ನಿ ವ್ಯವಸಾಯ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ. ಇದ್ದ ಸಂಪತ್ತುಗಳನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ಮ ಕೇಂದ್ರ ಸರ್ಕಾರದವರು ಮಾರಾಟ ಮಾಡಿಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಹಂಗಾಗಿ ಅಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ನಮಗೆ ಉದ್ಯೋಗ ಸಿಗ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಈ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ 14 ಲಕ್ಷ ಕೋಟಿ ರೂಪಾಯಿಯನ್ನು ಏನು ಇವು ಇದಾರವೆ ಅವರು ಎಲ್ಲ ಇದನ್ನು ಮನ್ನಾ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ, 14 ಲಕ್ಷ ಕೋಟಿ ರೂಪಾಯಿಯನ್ನು ಈ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ. ಆದರೆ ಬಡವರಿಗೆ ಸಿಗಬೇಕಾದ ಸೌಲಭ್ಯ ವಂಚನೆ ಮಾಡಿ ಇವತ್ತು ಶ್ರೀಮಂತರನ್ನ ಬೆಳೆಸೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಸರ್ಕಾರಗಳು ನಿಂತಿದ್ದಾವೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ಯೋಜನೆಗಳು ಏನಾಗಿದ್ದಾವೆ ಅಂತ ನಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ.
ಆಯ್ತು ಸರ್, ಕೊನೆ ಲಾಸ್ಟ್ ಪರ್ಸನ್ ದೇ. ದಟ್ಸ್ ಫೈನ್. ನೋ ದಿಸ್ ಮ್ಯಾನ್. ಯಾ,
ರಾಜೀವ್ ಗೌಡ ಸಾಹೇಬರಿಗೆ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಜಯಂತಿ ಮೇಡಮ್ಮು ಪ್ರಸ್ತಾಪನೆ ಮಾಡೋಂಥ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ನನಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ, ನನಗೆ ಡೌಟ್ ಇರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆನ ಜಯಂತಿ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಕೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. 25 ಇಯರ್ಸ್ ಇಂಡಿಪೆಂಡೆನ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾಗೆ ತಲೆ ಮೇಲೆ ಮಲ ಹೊರೋ ಪದ್ಧತಿಯನ್ನು ಬ್ಯಾನ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಡಿಗ್ನಿಟಿ ಆಫ್ ಹ್ಯೂಮನ್ ಇಯರ್ ಅಂತ ಆಯಿತು. ರಾಜೀವ್ ಸಾಹೇಬ್ರೆ, ಮೇಡಮ್ಗೆ ಹಿಂದಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳಿ. ತಿರ್ಗ 25ನೇ ದೇಶದ 25ನೇ ವರ್ಷದ ಸ್ವಾತಂತ್ರ್ಯೋತ್ಸವಕ್ಕೆ ತಲೆ ಮೇಲೆ ಮಲ ಹೊರೋ ಪದ್ಧತಿಯನ್ನು ಸ್ಟಾಪ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಡಿಗ್ನಿಟಿ ಆಫ್ ಹ್ಯೂಮನ್ ಇಯರ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. 75 ವರ್ಷ ಸರ್. ಈಗ ಮಿನಿಮಮ್ ವೇಜಸ್ ಆ್ಯಕ್ಟ್ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರಿ ಮೇಡಮ್, ಏನಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಯಾರು ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮಲ್ಲಿ ಎಸೆನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ವರ್ಕ್ ಮಾಡೋ ಅಂಥ ಕಾಶ್ಮೀರದಿಂದ ಕನ್ಯಾಕುಮಾರಿವರೆಗೂ, ಬಾಂಬೆಯಿಂದ ಕಲ್ಕಟ್ಟ ಗಂಟ ಏನು ಸಫಾಯಿ ಕರ್ಮಚಾರಿಗಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಇವತ್ತು ನೋಡಿ. ಏನು ಗೊತ್ತಂದ್ರೆ ನಾವಿಲ್ಲಿ ಶುದ್ಧವಾಗಿದ್ದೀವಿ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಕಾರಣ ಏನಂತಂದರೆ ಅವರು ಒಬ್ಬ ಆರೋಗ್ಯ ರಕ್ಷಕರು. ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಮಿನಿಮಮ್ ವೇಜಸ್ಸನ್ನು ಏನು ಕೊಡದೇನೆ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಅನ್ಯಾಯ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರೋದು. ಈ ದೇಶಕ್ಕೆ 75 ವರ್ಷ ಬಂದಿದ್ರೇನು ಸಂವಿಧಾನ ಜಾರಿ ಆಯ್ತಾ? ಆ ಒಂದು ಏನು ಗೊತ್ತಂದರೆ ಆರೋಗ್ಯ ರಕ್ಷಕರನ್ನು ರಕ್ಷಣೆ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಏನು ಗೊತ್ತಂದರೆ ಒಂದೇ ಜಾತಿ, ಅದು ಅಂದರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಇಳ್ಗಂಟ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರೋದಕ್ಕೂ ಒಂದೇ ಜಾತಿ ಆಗಿರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಏನು ಹಿಂದೆ 25 ವರ್ಷಗಳಿಂದ ಏನು ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾಯಿದ್ರು ಅದೇ ಕೆಲಸ ಆಗೈತೆ. ಇವತ್ತು ಮಂಗಲ ಗ್ರಹಕ್ಕೆ ಏನು ಗೊತ್ತಂತಂದರೆ ರಾಕೆಟ್ನ ಕಂಡುಹಿಡಿತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸ್ವಚ್ಛ ಭಾರತ್ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಏನು ಗೊತ್ತಂದರೆ ಹೊಸ ಮಾಡ್ರನ್ ಟೆಕ್ನಾಲಜಿಯನ್ನು ಇಂಪ್ಲಿಮೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡದೇ ಇರೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ ಡೆವಲಪ್ ಆಗೈತೆ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಅನಿಸ್ತಾಯ್ತಾ? ನನಗಂತೂ ಅನಿಸ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ.
So some of the key questions that have been raised point out that some of the discriminatory practices, exclusion from jobs of various kinds, all of those are continuing to be prevalent. And the latest speaker basically brought to our attention the fact that caste occupations continue to persist, especially in sanitation and domains like that. And we haven't been able to even give them the dignity of labor, forget a reasonable compensation for that difficult task. So, what is the promise and what is the reality is the broader question.
I completely agree with everybody who has described this reality. And I would even go further. It is not just that we haven't been able to change it. It is that our pattern of economic development has relied on this discrimination. It has depended on these segmented labor markets and on treating different workers differently, underpaid, unpaid, etc. I would go back to how Himanshu quoted Dr. Ambedkar, that the constitution is only as good as those who will be implementing it. And I would add that those who are implementing it will only be as good as society forces them to be. So it's really a reflection of the fact that we are a very unequal and a very hierarchical and discriminatory society. We have to change that. And we have to force those who are implementing the Constitution to actually implement it. Through political mobilization, through social mobilization, through all of that.
Okay. Are you all staying on for the next panel? Because that starts here at 3:30 and so we need to make some space. So one final question for the panel. So, if you were to look at the evolution of various movements, they were focused on ideology for the first 20, 30 years, paying attention to inequality and economic justice substantially. There were also movements for social justice, gender justice, and things of that sort. Now, when the dominant discourse seems to be of majoritarian religion and Hindutva, where is what the Constitution says and promises, and where are we heading? Any reactions to the critical juncture that we find ourselves in? Anyone wants to respond to this?
I mean, I think the point that Jayati was talking about is that we are in a time where the economic structure is very much aligned with the social structures of oppression. And in that sense, some kind of a diversion where you basically do not let those dissenting voices or voices of which are basically asking critical questions on the economic model is to be, I mean, that nobody wants that. And therefore, some kind of a diversion is necessary to keep that away. And there is perfect sync between those ones, in the sense that more though you ask these kind of questions, the non-economic questions, the Hindutva and other kind of a thing, the less of those voices that will basically come up. And I think that is where we have to basically go back to the roots of it. And I think I agree with the question that they are asking. And I said that, look, Constitution was not meant to be a rule book. And it is not something where everything has to be brought in. And it was something that was supposed to be a guiding principle. And once it is a guiding principle, then I think a lot of other things are assumed to be where the citizens also have a responsibility. It's not just the responsibility of implementing is only on the government. And I think the citizens have to ask the right questions, have to mobilize, and have to be as vigilant about protecting Constitution rather than simply saying that, okay, the government is not implementing it. I think that point is something where we have to ask the right questions and we have to fight for those ones.
And just to add one sentence to that, you know, it's not just about fighting for the Constitution, it's fighting for democracy. The more, it's not just in terms of politics and the whole other ways in which civil and political liberties are being denied. An economy that is so unequal, so based on hierarchy, discrimination, and exclusion has to be undemocratic. And the more you rely on that, the more undemocratic it becomes. So fighting for all of the constitutional values is also fighting for democracy.
I think, yes, I think our society is discriminatory and citizens have their own responsibility. But who is a citizen? I think there is a kind of question that needs to be asked from the state. I think state has its own accountability, and we need to, people like us need to keep raising those questions that states need to be accountable, state has a responsibility. Citizens can't do much. Anyway, you pay taxes. Even those who don't pay income tax, they also pay kind of 1/5 or 1/4 of their income as tax in some form or the other. So the state has its responsibility, and that responsibility is not simply of building roads, that is also responsibility of providing rights, of providing education, health, and various other things. And I think that's where the space of rights need to be expanded, question of education, question of health, all that needs to come in rights. So I think that's something which we need to ask from the state. We should not put all the burden on that. We citizens need to change, but I think state has its own kind of historic responsibility, and that's what has happened in other parts of the world. We are a democratic country, and we need to assert our rights, and Indians are not. So there is a kind of narrative being created, and media in some sense makes us feel that there is no hope. I think there are movements everywhere. Even today also there is a lot of restlessness. There's a lot of kind of resistance happening at various levels in various forms, and I think we need to kind of bring that together, and only then there is kind of hope for this society.
मेरे साथियों की सारी बातों से मैं सहमत हूँ। हिंदी में बोल रहा हूँ क्योंकि बहुत लोग हिंदी में बोल रहे थे। हिंदी में ना बोलूँ तो आप लोग बता दीजिए। हिंदी ठीक है। तो मैं ये कहना चाहता हूँ, साथियों की सारी बातों से सहमत हूँ, लेकिन इसके साथ मुझे लगता है कि एक और चीज़ करने की ज़रूरत है। वो ये है कि धरातल पर गांव दर गांव, कस्बे दर कस्बे, मोहल्ले दर मोहल्ले में सोशो कल्चरल कंस्ट्रक्टिव काम की ज़रूरत है, बहुत ज़रूरत है। यही हम लोगों ने मेरे ख्याल से पिछले 30-40 साल में बहुत कम किया है। ये अगर हम नहीं करेंगे तो हम जिस संविधान को चाहते हैं अपनी ज़िंदगी में, अपने समाज में, बड़ा मुश्किल है। और अगर सोशो कल्चरल कंस्ट्रक्टिव काम ऐसा हो जिससे कि हमारी ज़िंदगी, हम लोग, हमारी कम्युनिटीज़ थोड़ा ज़्यादा एम्पैथेटिक हो जाएं, थोड़ा ज़्यादा काइंड हो जाएं, लिटिल बिट ऑफ काइंडनेस, बहुत सारी चीज़ें हैं वो सॉल्व होने लगेंगी.
Thank you so much to all us esteemed panelists. We had a really great discussion. I sincerely thank all our esteemed speakers for sharing their invaluable insights and perspectives on the topic. Your expertise has enriched us and your discussions has inspired us throughout. Thank you so much to all our participants for their thought-provoking questions and engagement. And thank you so much for our organizers for lucidly conducting this event. We sit together in 2 to 3 minutes for the next session. Thank you so much, everyone.
Check. Check.
मैं अभी माइक से बोलते हुए
Check, check.
Good afternoon, all of you. I would request the audience to kindly settle down so that we can start with the session. I would request the audience to kindly settle down, please. We'll start the session in 5 minutes. Kindly settle down, please. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, all the dignitaries, Honorable Chair, and the esteemed speaker for this session too. I am Christina Kujur, the moderator for this session titled Fundamental Rights, Directive Principles and Citizenship. The discussion in this session will revolve around Baba Saheb Ambedkar's perspective, national unity, the concept of a uniform civil code, state reorganization, and the principle of cooperative federalism. Now, without any further ado, I would like to welcome our esteemed chair, the panelists on the stage, and let's welcome our dignitaries with a huge round of applause. I would like to call Ms. Medha Patkar, Shri Siddharth Vardarajan, Shri Sanjay Hegde, Shri Harsh Mandar, and Professor C. Basavaraju. As we proceed, I would like to take a few minutes to introduce our esteemed panelists for this session. I would like to invite Professor Krishna Raj to felicitate the speakers with a token of our appreciation. Okay. Now, Professor Krishna Raj will felicitate Ms. Medha Patkar.
Check, check. Check, 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 check.
Shri Siddharth Vardarajan. Shri Siddharth Vardarajan.
Check, check.
Shri Sanjay Hegde. Shri Harsh Mandar.
Check, check.
And Professor Basavaraju. Thank you, Professor Krishna Raj. Now, I would like to take a few minutes to introduce our esteemed panelists for this session. Ms. Medha Patkar is a renowned Indian activist devoted to addressing social and political issues affecting marginalized communities. A TIS alumnus, she co-founded the Narmada Bachao Andolan, advocating for justice for those who impacted by water dam projects. We are privileged to have her with us today as the chair of this session. Thank you, ma'am. Our second panelist is Shri Siddharth Vardarajan. He is a prominent Indian journalist and editor, and is the founding editor of the news outlet, The Wire. His significant contributions have earned him prestigious award, and in December 2022, he received a Red Ink Award in politics category for his articles on the Pegasus spyware. Our third panelist is Shri Sanjay Hegde, who is a distinguished senior advocate at the Supreme Court in India, renowned for his unwavering commitment to civil rights. Beyond the courtroom, he is a prolific writer, contributing insightful pieces to major Indian newspapers and magazines. His expertise extends to media, and he frequently appears as a legal expert on various news channels. He stands as a stalwart defender of civil liberties, leaving an indelible mark on the legal landscape of India. Our third panelist is Shri Harsh Mandar. He's a distinguished author, columnist, researcher, teacher, and a social activist. He is also a former Indian Administrative Services officer. He played pivotal role in founding the National Campaign for the People's Right to Information, and known for his advocacy for marginalized communities and the victims of the communal violence. His legacy includes tireless advocate for social justice, and it remains undeniable, leaving an indelible mark on the Indian society. Our final panelist is Professor C. Basavaraju. He's a distinguished legal scholar and educator with a rich academic background. His expertise lies in constitutional law, environmental law, human rights law, and social justice law. Currently, he serves as the Vice Chancellor of Karnataka State Law University, Hubballi. We welcome all our panelists. Now, without any further ado, I would like to hand over this session to the chair. Thank you.
Friends, I was wondering whether I should speak in Hindi or English because I could see a number of people who were sitting around me, the backside, were not understanding English, but who all want it in English? Please raise your hands. Okay, thank you very much. So as you know that the Constitution, that is not just a gift, but a real Aadhaar that doesn't come through to the Aadhaar card for all the oppressed, suppressed, marginalized, peripheralized communities and the whole of the citizenry of India in this country. And that's why to have this convention organized by one of the ministries of the Karnataka government with courage and commitment is something to be saluted for. And we also hope that whatever will come out of the discussion will also be taken into consideration by the new government of Karnataka in their future planning, implementation, deciding about the manzil जहाँ तक पहुँचना है. तो ये केवल एक डिस्कशन होकर ख़त्म नहीं होना चाहिए. Some people, as was said in the last panel, would look forward to certain action plan, but the same thing is expected from the state government of Karnataka as well. It's very certain that today's theme is something that really helps us to understand the importance of this small little handbook. What is said by K.K. Venugopal is very, very relevant. This little book in our hands has revolutionized the lives of the people. We have a long march ahead, and day after day, the sacred words of the directive principles of the Constitution have brought solace to the billions of people of this country. And that is why I believe that every Indian, whether he be a lawyer, judge or not, should have a copy of this little book, small in size, but huge in its human dimensions. I believe that this elegant book should be in the pockets of every Indian, enabling him to derive inspiration from the greatness of the ideas contained in the Constitution of India, which we, the people of India, have given unto ourselves. Now, this said in the foreword of this small little book is something that can be the basis for us to analyze the present situation in the country. And not just say that this book is a great book. And many, many youths might not have read every word, not even every article and every, schedule in the Constitution. So these kinds of dialogues by the eminent representatives of the civil society, but also various authorities, is very, very important. You be ready with your questions, no doubt about it, but let us start with the presentation by each one. And since we have 1 hour, we would say that we will start with 10 minutes each and then come to the question-answer session. So I would request Mr. Basavaraju, who is the Vice Chancellor of the Knowledge University. So nothing needs to be introduced further. And he would take 10 minutes to present his views on fundamental rights, directive principles, and citizenship of the Indian Constitution. Thank you so much.
respected all the panelists, chairman, all the invitees, students, members from media, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I am going to discuss on how far the concept of social justice can be promoted and ensured to the last man of the society through judicial activism. I am reminded of the words of Lord Denning. He says, every decision of new situation is a development of law. Law does not still, but it is dynamic. The task of law is to act as an instrument of evolution in accordance with which the changing needs of the society and the demands justice. Unquote. At the outset, the concept of social justice has got a multifarious connotations. It does not confine to one meaning, but multifarious connotations. It signifies the welfare of the state as well as the egalitarian society which was thought of by our framers of the Constitution. But unfortunately, even today, we have not been able to achieve the egalitarian society which is devoid of discrimination, inequality, exploitation, existence of untouchability, and caste discrimination and gender bias. Of course, though nature has endowed men with inalienable rights of men, wherein all men and women are equal in all respects, in terms of equality, liberty, and freedom and fraternity. Most of the countries across the globe today, they are endeavoring to ensure social justice to all the vulnerable sections of the society. As millions and millions of people in India still are being dominated, subjected to domination and subjected to exploitation and various kinds of degradation by the haves. But with the growth of the civilization, with the growth of the industrialization, or even the growth of the urbanization, there is a total structural change in the society, as a result of which many social evils are emerging, causing damage to the harmony, integrity, and the honesty of the people in the society. John Rawls' theory of justice also, in fact, focuses upon. John Rawls rejects the meritocracy and advocates for fair and equality of opportunity to remedy the social inequality which exists among ourselves. And he advocates that society should endeavor to equalize economic wealth, social status, and political power, which has not been achieved so far. If you look at the dimension of the social justice from the Constitution perspective, the entire edifice of the Indian Constitution is built on the premise of social justice. And even the preambular objective of the Constitution of India is to achieve the welfare state with the object of ensuring social inclusion. The social inclusion of all people belonging to different communities, different religions, different ethnic groups, caste, culture, and various languages. The element of social inclusion primarily focuses upon the vulnerable sections, the marginalized groups, and disadvantaged and weaker sections of the society. Every government, irrespective of the nature, should commit itself for empowering the weaker sections of the society to bring them to the mainstream. It is unfortunate that even after 75 years of the Constitution came into force, we have not been able to achieve the preambular objectives of the Constitution, which is intended for by our makers of the Constitution. For example, the Constitution makers, they endeavor to bridge the gap between the haves and have-nots, try to bridge the gap between the unequals and equals, justice and injustice, and still we have been living in a dichotomy, even after 75 years, dichotomy between the minority and majority, dichotomy between the rich and the poor, and dichotomy between various other factors. So therefore, in order to ensure social justice to all sections of the society, irrespective of the religion or irrespective of the caste, there is a need to promote the protective discrimination. And of course, the Constitution of India has ensured the protective discrimination under Article 15.4 and 16.4, and even Article 15.3 for the women and children. But the question, the larger question, which is confronted to us is, have we achieved the goal which are enshrined in the Constitution, either promoting the protective discrimination strategy or mechanism? A policy of mechanism was made under the Constitution to introduce the protective discrimination in respect of members of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes and backward classes. And the primary objective is to protect the discrimination, protective discrimination provided in the Constitution is to ensure social justice to the marginalized groups and vulnerable sections of the society. We have been witnessing from various angles in the society that even the vulnerable sections of the society, including the marginalized groups, they are still under subjugation by the various sections of the society. Besides, the framers of the Constitution of India, they have provided certain freedoms to people in general and vulnerable sections in particular to raise their voice against all kinds of exploitation and all kinds of the injustice, inequality, and exploitation and inhuman treatment. For example, the freedom of speech and expression, which is provided as a fundamental right in the Constitution of India under Article 19(1)(a), against all kinds of injustice, inequality, and exploitation. The freedoms which are fundamental in the Constitution of India, every individual has to enjoy these freedoms in order to build their equal status that of others. And various freedoms which are identified in the Part 3 of the Constitution for every citizen to live with human dignity. And of course, the basic idea of the constitutional mandate is to see that every person, every citizen of this country, irrespective of the caste and irrespective of the religion or irrespective of the community, must live with human dignity, even though it is ensured in the Constitution of India under Article 21. It has become a mirage today. Maybe 20 to 25% of the people may be living with human dignity, but the rest of the people in India, they have not been able to live as human beings because of the fact that they are incessantly subjected to humiliation, subjected to exploitation, and subjected to injustice and inequalities. For many years, the members of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, they were not allowed to live with human dignity. To ensure dignified life to the people, the right to life and personal liberty has been ensured as a fundamental right. We always look at the judiciary, what best judiciary can provide by interpreting the constitutional mandates to ensure justice, equality, liberty, and decent life to the vulnerable sections. The framers of the Indian Constitution have provided the fundamental rights to all citizens to see that they should live with human dignity and to ensure that even the state is also obligated under the Constitution to ensure whatever is required to live with a decent life. In Olga Tellis versus Bombay Municipal Corporation, Port Bombay versus Dilip Kumar Raghavendranath Nadkarni, Delhi Development Corporation versus the Delhi government. See, in all these cases, the Supreme Court has the view that right to life under Article 21 includes right to livelihood. The larger question which remains with us is whether the people who are living in the society, who have no economic stability, who are identified as poor people, the weaker sections of the society, the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, the backward classes, are they really getting the livelihood as it is provided under the Constitution of India? There are a plethora of instances where the Supreme Court had to interpret and to act as a proactive role in identifying certain acts as fundamental to the individuals. Especially the directive principle of the state policy, the much awaited dream of vision of our framers of the Indian Constitution has been realized when the directive principle of the state policy were incorporated into the Constitution. The welfare state is built on the premise of directive principle of the state policy, which safeguards and provide the welfare measures to the weaker sections of the society. Remember, the doors of the temple of justice are opened with these principles to take cognizance of the problems of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes.
Mr. Basavaraj,
For instance,
please conclude.
the Constitution of India has mandated the state to try for promote the welfare of the people. The welfare of the people by securing and protecting the effective possible method of protecting their interest. There are a number of instances where the Supreme Court has interpreted the constitutional provisions and especially the Article 15, Article 15 subclass 1 and 16 subclass 1 and 16 subclass 2 to see that the vulnerable sections of the society should get the due share of the society. So therefore, this protective role of judiciary to ensure social justice has been provided expressly in the Constitution to see that to offset all kinds of inequalities, injustice, exploitation which exist among all the vulnerable groups and especially the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes and the weaker sections of the society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Honorable Vice Chancellor has brought forth especially the right to life, which includes right to livelihood, but also right to housing, right to education, right to food, and everything that is the deprivation of faced by various peripheralized communities, including caste-based and others who have the positive discriminatory policies for, but still they are facing not just deprivation, but even destitution. And he has also referred to the pillars of democracy, especially judiciary and their role. I would request Harsh Mandarji to really take 10 minutes maximum and put forth his viewpoints with some concrete suggestions also for the civil society at large and the rulers who are the power holders and responsible and are bound by the Constitution.
Friends, let me start with something that happened in a small working class suburb of Delhi a few months ago. It was the Ganesh Puja period. A young man, a young Muslim man of about 20 years, mentally challenged, got up in the morning and he went to one of the pandals close to his home and he picked up a banana and ate it. Some people recognized him to be a Muslim. They caught hold of him, they tied him to a pole and they started beating him. They beat him for about 2 hours until his life was almost emptied from his body. They finally let him go. His home was only 200 meters away, but he could not drag himself those 200 meters, and 10 hours later he bled to death. When I went to meet the family, his father, he just kept weeping and he said, my son ate a banana as prasad and they beat him to death. When I went then with him to see where this lamppost was located, where this young man was tied, I was even more shocked because I thought it would have been in some isolated place, but it was in the middle of an extremely densely packed locality. The young man was screaming pathetically for 2 hours. My estimate is some 5,000, 10,000 people must have passed that way. No one came to his rescue. I believe India is passing through a moment of profound civilizational crisis. The government has a lot to do with it, but most of all it has to do with you and I. It is the same indifference that we displayed when 30 million people, workers, walked hundreds of kilometers during the hot summer months of the pandemic, and we were safely ensconced in our homes, sort of happily banging thalis when so instructed. I believe that this civilizational crisis represents the gravest threat to India's constitutional morality and the principles by which we, the people of India, chose in the years leading up to 1950, we chose to be a certain kind of country. We can talk a lot about the Constitution. To my mind, if there are two core principles of the Constitution and its morality, one of them is the promise of equal citizenship and belonging. That it will not matter what God you worship or if you worship no God. It will not matter what your caste, your language, your faith, your ideology, your sexuality, your gender, your wealth, whatever it is, you're a fully equal human being, a fully equal citizen with fully equal belonging and fully equal rights to this country without any conditions, except a fidelity to the values of the Constitution. Not to any majority religion or faith, to the values of the Constitution. That was the country that we, the people of India, promised that we would build. And that is the country that we are losing every day with very little protest and with substantial complicity. So I thought in the 10 minutes that I have, I will talk and focus on the Muslim question in India. And I believe I must talk about it because if I did not, it would be like living through Nazi Germany and speaking about everything else except the Jews. History would judge us very harshly if we did not acknowledge that India's constitutional morality, and I would say the founding ideas of this country itself, and I would add further what is finest in our civilizational legacy. All of it is being threatened, jeopardized, demolished with and by the attack on India's Muslim minority of 200 million people. The state, in a sense, has waged war against a segment of our people simply because of their religious identity. Hannah Arendt had talked about citizenship as the right to have rights. I believe that we have already entered a zone of public living with very little protest and resistance from the rest of us, where Muslims today do not have the right to have rights. You can call for their genocide from a public platform like this. You can call for mass rape. Chief ministers can lead in hate speech against Muslims. The state can decide to just walk in, make a list, and demolish homes of people of Muslim identity. And that has happened, I was tracing, in at least 100 districts of this country so far. There is no law in the world that, at least not in our country, that you can demolish someone's home because they've committed a crime. And to prove that somebody's committed a crime, you at least have to go through some kind of process. You've thrown away, the Constitution to the winds, and you have this targeted demolition. I saw in No over 4 days, structures were demolished in a way that no mob could have accomplished. And the people of Mewat told me that everything that they had achieved it's the poorest district in the country by Niti Aayog's assessment. Everything they had built over the last generations was destroyed by the state. You don't need the lynch mob anymore. That is what living without the right to have rights, where we have reached. And we have reached there because more and more of us are accomplices in this project of hate. What I learned when I looked carefully at Nazi Germany was that the horror of Nazi Germany actually was not Hitler. It was ordinary people. The horror of what is unfolding today is not Mr. Narendra Modi. It is you and I. It is our participation. It is our endorsement. It is our celebration of hate. On 22nd January 2024, the Prime Minister assumed the role of some kind of head priest for the country, and he presided over the consecration of a temple. It was not an ordinary temple. The significance of that temple was that it was built at the site of a medieval mosque that was broken down by a mob. I go back to the greatest living Hindu of our times, and that is Mahatma Gandhi. I recall for you what was his last fast. His last fast, 2 weeks before he died. What were his demands? The first demand, I think, is better known, that Pakistan should get its due share. Brothers can fight, but when there's a separation, you must give them their share. But the second demand is something I want to recall today. And that second demand was that, refugees had come in tens of thousands, including my own extended family, uprooted, very angry, very distressed. And one of the things they started doing was that in the Connaught Place Mosque, the Mehroli Dargah, they placed Hindu idols and said, we are now going to convert these into temples. And Gandhiji's last fast, which he said himself was his greatest fast, His demand was that we must return to our Muslim brothers and sisters those places of worship, because he said no true place of worship can be built on disrespect to another religion. So I'm quite certain that the grand structure in Ayodhya would not have been recognized by Mahatma Gandhi as a temple at all, as a place of devotion and worship. We are all called upon to remember Ram today. I wonder which Ram we are thinking about, which Ram we hold in our hearts. The Ram whose name was in Gandhiji's lips when Nathuram Godse shot him 2 weeks after this fast. That Ram, or the Ram in whose name Nathuram Godse assassinated Mahatma Gandhi. This is not a time, Hindutva and its triumphalism has nothing to do with religious faith. It has nothing to do with ethics. It has to do with a certain triumphalism on the one hand of the majority and the subjugation into fear of a minority. I've spent many months, the last months, everywhere I travel, people of Muslim identity want to have quiet, closed-door meetings, and the room fills up. And I really wanted to share what I heard in at least 50 meetings from across the country. The word I heard most was fear. Dar, khauf. Dar laga rehta hai. When my father goes out, my brother, my husband, my son, I'm terrified. I don't know whether they'll come back safe. There's a vague fear that has enveloped our lives. You travel in a train, we don't know who's going to attack, who's going to come in and open your fridge and check whether what meat you have. When that soldier, railway policeman killed his superior on a train and then killed 3 men of Muslim identity, a young woman who works with me, she came into my office sobbing, and she said, I haven't been able to sleep. I can't think of anything else. And she was crying. I sat her down and I said, what happened? She said, those men could have been my father. They could have been my brother. I don't know where we'll go. What will we do? Where is there a place for us of safety and dignity and equality in this country? The second word that they use most is betrayal. They keep asking, was India always like this? Were we fooling ourselves when we thought this country equally belonged to us? Or has something changed within us? I spoke about the soul of our constitution, which we are called upon to defend. On the one hand, the soul of our constitution was that idea of equal citizenship for people of every faith, identity, caste, community. But Baba Sahib Ambedkar told us the true soul of our constitution lies in the word fraternity. Fraternity in Hindi is bandhuta, which is a beautiful word. It means hum ek dusre se bandhe hue hain. We might be of different identities, different beliefs, different ways of life. We may eat and dress and speak and worship and love differently, but we are bound to and with each other. When Pehlu Khan is beaten on his back with a stick, I feel the pain on my back. When a young Dalit girl is gang raped and killed, I mourn her like my own daughter. That is the India we promised to build. That is the India we've traveled so far from. That is the India that I hope, and the 2024 elections are before us. When a group of India MPs wanted to meet some of us in Delhi, and we sat in a small room, and I was actually delighted listening to them because they were saying exactly what I'm speaking here. they would say, we want back the India of, we want back the India of our childhood. We want back an India of freedom. My only question to them is, why are you not saying this from public platforms? We are fighting an ideological war for love and equality and justice for all, and we are unwilling to even state that this is the battle we are fighting. And that is what I wish, and it is a battle that we, the people of India, must fight if our leaders are unwilling to fight these for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It is Harsh Mandarji who has the deep sensitivity and who has played a very great role during and immediately after the Gujarat riots. And while he was giving such examples, like a small boy in Rajasthan, a Dalit boy was beaten and killed only because he drank water from his teacher's matka. So those kinds of experiences are really heartbreaking. और आज जो अस्तित्व के सवाल जिस पर कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का एक एक आर्टिकल स्टेट को ड्यूटी बाउंड मानता है, उनको बाजू में रखकर नकारने के लिए जो अस्मिता के सवाल उठा रहे हैं, उसका पूरा उसकी हकीकत हमारे सामने हर्ष मंदर जी ने रखी है. राइट टू फ्रीडम केवल स्पीच एंड एक्सप्रेशन की नहीं, बट टू फॉलो एंड प्रमोट वंस ओन रिलीजन एंड ऑल्सो go for conversion, which Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar himself had taken the path to. और आज जब एंटी कन्वर्जन एक्ट होता है, तो is that really acceptable, legally tenable in the framework of values enshrined in the Constitution is a question that should also be answered by the senior advocate, Mr. Hegde. I think freedom के साथ साथ equality का fundamental right, इसको implement करवाने के लिए क्या करना पड़ेगा? What is the way out? And what is the difference between the fundamental rights and the directive principles which are non-justiciable? Why are those kept to be non-justiciable, cannot be enforced by any court? Is also a question that was raised by Subhash Wareji, and we all have been raising that question. So directive principles also is the framework and the basis for the state to bring in enactments. And no law also can be against the fundamental rights or violating the fundamental rights. तो आज जो law making की process हो रही है, संसद जैसी चल रही है, सांसदों को बाहर करके लॉ अमेंडमेंट विद इन 3 मिनट्स जो हो रही है, तो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में दिए हुए डायरेक्टिव प्रिंसिपल्स जो फंडामेंटल राइट्स को इम्प्लीमेंट करने के लिए मुख्य आधार स्टेट ने मानना चाहिए, उसके ही आधार पर लॉ मेकिंग एंड एनी अमेंडमेंट ऑल्सो कैसी हो सकती है और कैसे नहीं हो रही है, ये हम अपेक्षा करते हैं कि सीनियर एडवोकेट संजय हेगड़े जी हमारे सामने रखेंगे. और गुजरात के अभी पब्लिक हियरिंग करके मैं आई हूँ, तो अभी बड़े राइट्स कोई नहीं है, पर हर जगह जगह बुलडोजर कोर्ट बन रहा है उत्तर प्रदेश के जैसा, घर तोड़े जा रहे हैं, मुस्लिमों को एविक्ट कराया जा रहा है, डिस्प्लेसमेंट के साथ डेस्टिट्यूशन भुगतने पड़ रहा है, रोते हुए उनके डिपोजिशंस जब हुए तब आज क्या स्थिति है वो सब हमारे सामने आई है. तो संजय हेगड़े जी प्लीज.
Good evening. I was asked to speak about Dr. Ambedkar's views on fundamental rights. Medaji has asked me to speak on a variety of things, including the tension between the fundamental rights and the directive principles of state policy. But I do believe that many of these questions can largely be answered by a look into our constitutional history. As I came in, I saw these various lounges: liberty, equality, fraternity. And these words came to us from the French Revolution. And from the French Revolution, they traveled to America, especially in Thomas Paine's The Rights of Man. When a translated version in Marathi fell into the hands of Mahatma Phule, when he read that man hath no property in another man, that is when the revolution began in India. That is when a whole host of people started writing pamphlets, starting asking for an equal society. We were emerging from a society which, when we ruled ourselves, we told ourselves karmanya vadikaraste. And if you look at it, it meant that you had a right only to your duties. And who would assign those duties? Those duties would be assigned to you by society, by your ruler, and whatever your circumstances were. It was when we realized that we were not mere tools of duty. If the depressed classes, the scheduled tribes, had stayed off the Indian state, we do not know whether today we would have been sitting in a united India as it currently exists. It was that kind of constitutional thinking that reached out in fraternity to Dr. Ambedkar of identity politics, that way of violence. And so we built a constitution where every individual had his rights, where a society, an equal society, which strove towards fraternity, was to be built. As I came in and I saw Medatai with that little red book, the Constitution of India, with the binding showing how well worn it was, how well read it was. Because as one of the best judges who never made it to the US Supreme Court, Justice Learned Hand once said, that liberty lies in the hearts of men and women. When it dies there, no court, no constitution can do much to save it. If we cogitate, if we remember why we wrote a constitution, if we remember the ideals of fraternity, if we remember the idea that all men are created equal and that we are bound in ties of nationhood and fraternity, that we will continue to hand over a constitution to our children and our grandchildren. It is a living document. It has a certain flexibility. Medatai asked about whether the directive principles are something which cannot be enforced. Dr. Ambedkar himself said that these were guiding stars. Guiding stars which, if an elected government forgot or ignored or went contrary to, they would answer to the people. The Constitution is a solemn compact between citizen and citizen. It is that compact which is the underlying base of the state. And as long as we constantly renew our constitutional vows, you don't need sentinels on the qui-vive sitting in Bhagwandas Road to take notice or to not take notice. Courts can only do so much for the Constitution. It is when we, as citizens, own it, when we, as citizens, live it, that we leave a better country for our countrymen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Most of us know that it was Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar who wanted the directive principles to be included as fundamental rights. But the Samvidhan Sabha, with few women members, but members who were representative of various communities and various states in the country, as on today, they denied to have that. And whether that is a mistake or not needs to be pondered over. But what Mr. Ranade has said, it is very essential to notice that today when each of the right is crushed and impinged upon and violated, we have to really fight for the same. But when we talk about citizenship as only one concern, and on 10th of February, our present Central Home Minister himself has declared that after or before the upcoming Lok Sabha election, they would again bring in and implement CAA, the Amended Citizenship Act, in all the states beyond Assam and partly implemented in Bengal. तो शाहीने कोई आसमान में उड़ तो नहीं गई है. जो खंत व्यक्त की हर्ष मंदर जी ने कि प्रोटेस्ट कम हो रहा है, मुझे लगता है कि उस समय के शाहीन बाग का प्रोटेस्ट फिर से शुरू होगा, क्योंकि ये एंटी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल है कि रिलीजन के आधार पर किसी को आप सिटीजनशिप से एक्सक्लूड करते हैं, बाहर रखते हैं. बाबा साहब ने ही नहीं, सभी ने ये कहा था कि रिलीजन को कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में केवल फ्रीडम के रूप में मेंशन करना चाहिए. वन ऑफ द मेंबर्स ऑफ द संविधान सभा H.V. कामत, उन्होंने आग्रह रखा था कि लेट अस स्टार्ट विथ ईश्वर चरण, इवन द प्रीएम्बल, but that was rejected by a vast majority amongst the members of the Samvidhan Sabha. And you all know that it was comparatively late in 1976 that Indira Gandhi ji added Dharma Nirapekshata or Samajwad, secularism and socialism, not just as two words added to the preamble, but the two values which now are going to be likely to be rejected by the fundamentalists who have also, through some of their representatives, filed a petition before the apex court to remove those two words and to just, crush those values also. So it is very essential for us to know that all that is mentioned today, asserting the citizenship which has to be beyond any kind of discrimination, is something that would be taken forward to every right that is granted. And the same rights are reflected into every directive principle. For example, right to action plan. So now I request Siddhartha Varadarajan. You know he is an exceptionally courageous, truth-bound, satyagrahi media person. The Wire has really linked all of us through their medium, and today this forum is also providing another medium for his free and fair expression that we all look forward to.
Thank you, Medatai. We don't have too much of time, and you've heard from 4 distinguished speakers already. On the question of fundamental rights, directive principles and citizenship, it's interesting to actually focus on where the threat today lies as far as the ordinary citizen is concerned. And I would say that it is most dangerous and ominous and worrying that the right to free expression or rather freedom of expression and freedom of assembly two fundamental rights which are realized, which can only be realized in their expression. Freedom of expression is realized and consummated by people freely expressing themselves. Freedom of assembly, citizenship is about a free people exercising control over how they live their lives, exercising control, ensuring accountability over elected representatives, ensuring that a government works for the people. And you simply cannot ensure that without freedom of expression and without freedom of assembly. Today, just look at the manner in which the farmers of Punjab and Haryana are being treated by the authorities. Is it illegal? Is it a crime for farmers to want to march peacefully to Delhi? Is aimed at criminalizing the very act of assembly. You don't want to allow people of India to gather in large numbers to peacefully raise their voices on issues that concern them. And what is happening on the Punjab-Haryana border is not an exception. This is increasingly becoming the rule. In state after state, whenever people attempt to gather to protest, increasingly we see force being used against them. The state has developed new tactics. I fear, Medatai spoke about the need for Shaheen Bagh to come again. I fear that today the Indian state has developed and perfected new weapons of repression, which will make it much more difficult for mobilization of that kind to happen in the national capital or indeed anywhere else in the country. For example, the use of demolitions. And the Supreme Court, which can see what is happening, how house demolitions are being used as a tool to curb dissent. House demolitions are being used as an illegal form of imposing a punishment that no court has yet ruled against a particular individual. Yet the administration is deciding that this person is guilty, and you are using a form of punishment that is not envisaged or provided for in the statute books. Yet the Supreme Court is unwilling to take a stand on this. The Punjab and Haryana High Court, which considered what happened in Nuh in his initial ruling, found that the Haryana authorities had acted illegally and used very harsh language. The judge was moved out, the case went somewhere else, and that's the last we've heard of it. So, using the weapon of house demolitions, using internet bans, India today is the internet ban capital of the world, where at the flick of a switch, in the face of any kind of public protest, the authorities do not hesitate for even a second to order telecom companies to switch off mobile internet services. So today in vast parts of Haryana, it's simply not possible for farmers to communicate, forget farmers, anybody else. So internet ban as a method of repressing and ensuring that people do not gather has been perfected as a tool. Putting pressure on social media companies to delete content. You are not satisfied that you have stopped farmers of Punjab and Haryana from marching physically. You are not satisfied by the fact that the media that you control maligns the farmers day in, day out as violent people, as Khalistanis and whatnot. But if the farmer chooses to shoot their own videos, chooses to raise their own voice through social media, you then put pressure on X, on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, and you get these videos and these posts deleted. And I've reviewed hundreds of these posts. There is no, were these matters to actually end up in court, any half-decent judge would say that this is completely illegal use of any authority that the Government of India or the Haryana government has. But we see content being deleted. We see internet services being shut down. We see cases being filed for people who raise their voice. To put fear in the mind of everybody to think 100 times before they say or write something. कि किसी ने कोई चीज़ पोस्ट कर दिया नरेंद्र मोदी के खिलाफ. If I like it, if I share it, am I running the risk of the police in Pratapgarh filing a case against me because some BJP worker says कि पार्टी की मानहानि हुई है? It's a rubbish case. But you will be tied up in court proceedings which you can't afford. You may even have to spend a couple of days behind bars. Assembly. Then all your other rights remain unenforceable. Because if people cannot speak, if people cannot gather to talk about casteism, to demand the positive discrimination that our Vice Chancellor spoke about, to demand implementation of all the other fundamental rights, if people cannot speak and assemble and gather and put pressure, then none of those rights will be enforced. And I'm afraid I do not share the optimism of some people in this country that the courts are going to step into the breach. What we've seen so far is too little to instill that kind of confidence. But I think that we need to bear in mind that these fundamental rights, particularly of expression and assembly, have to be ensured, have to be protected and defended at all costs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all the members of the panel. I will just like to put forth some of the issues which I think should be added to fill the gaps. The first and the foremost, the economic inequality, which was the theme that was discussed in the previous panel, no doubt about it. But when the Article 39 really says, to which the state is duty bound to bring in laws relatedly, that the economy of the country should not be such that a few has maximum property in their hands. How can we tolerate that a handful of corporates have increased their property even during the pandemic period? And even today they are earning 1,000 to 1,600 crores per day. We have to really assert our right to equity, and that can be achieved only if their property is confiscated and made available for the public purpose. We should also insist on the change in the taxation policy. If even 1% of the richest are compelled to pay 2% on the wealth tax, then also more than 7 to 8 lakh crores will come into the state exchequer per year. And if the inheritance tax is also increased to 50%, which is only once upon a time, then more than 9 to 10 lakh crores will also come to the state exchequer. How can this not be attempted and inserted into their economic action plan is our question. And that's because we know that for last 9 to 10 years, what has happened? About 40 lakh crores is the amount which would have come to the state exchequer if the taxes were not reduced from 30% to 22%. And they have also written off the loans not of the farmers who are compelled to commit suicides, but of the corporates. Let us raise our voice against this on the basis of constitutional articles, directive principles. We must also talk about what is happening in terms of the Rojgar, the livelihood. राम की बात हुई है, राम राज्य की बात हो रही है, पर राम से कोई पेट नहीं भरता। हे राम और जय श्री राम में तो फर्क है ही, पर कहाँ राम है, क्या रहीम है, यह प्रकृति जीवन में रहा। मेरा ही जल मेरी नदी, ये ज़मीन और जंगल मेरा है। ये जो आदिवासियों की प्रकृति निर्भर नेचुरल रिसोर्स बेस्ड कम्युनिटीज़ की भावना नहीं, कामना ही नहीं, तो जीवन प्रणाली है, उसके ऊपर जो आक्रमण हो रहा है वो भी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल राइट्स एंड डायरेक्टिव प्रिंसिपल्स के खिलाफ है। आर्टिकल 48A जिसमें एनवायरनमेंट इज टू बी प्रोटेक्टेड एंड प्रमोटेड, आज क्या हो रहा है? फॉरेस्ट कंजर्वेशन एक्ट ऐसा बदल दिया कि विदाउट seeking consent or even consult even in the name of farmers, the new schemes which are declared, on one hand the Revdi is saying that we will give you 6,000 but not MSP. They say that they have no money to pay the minimum support price. Well, maximum support price and maximum financial support coming through various agreements which we do not have the transparency about, no accountability, no information. Although there is Right to Information Act, when the G20 kind of forum is used for the same purpose. So all the international financial institutions with globalization, liberalization, privatization policy, what had Baba Saheb Ambedkar said? That maximum number of industries should be in the hands of the state. And रोजगार बढ़ाने की बात जो आर्टिकल 41 में राइट टू वर्क है, एंड कॉटेज इंडस्ट्रीज, स्मॉल इंडस्ट्रीज, इसके द्वारा इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन अगर बढ़ता है, हैंडमेड इकोनॉमी को प्रमोट करते हैं, तो सर्टनली रोजगार आज जो 7% से आगे बढ़ रहा है, उसको बेरोजगारी जो 7% से आगे बढ़ रही है, उसको हम लोग रोक सकते हैं। हम लोगों की ये डिमांड होनी चाहिए, एंड दिस इज ऑल्सो रिलेटेड टू the fundamental duties of the citizen, which is also a part in the constitution. So when we say that the state is duty bound to change the economy, to bring in social, economic and political equity, which all are related, we must also say that we are also duty bound as the citizens. ये कैसे हो सकता है? अगर कृषि खाद्यान्न की सब्सिडी इन्होंने इस बजट में 82% से कम कर दी, इन्होंने फसल बीमा पर जो अमाउंट बजटेड थी पहले 2021-22 में, वो 34% से कम कर दिए। तो द गेम दैट इज बीइंग प्लेड also needs to be noted as illegal, unconstitutional and also inhuman, leading to eviction with bulldozers as the courts, regarding related to the minorities, and also promoting through these kinds of wrong kind of economic premises and action plans as well as budget plans. तो कैसे होगा कि violence, which has become one of the main basis for the rule to be more assertive and militarized, is something that also need to be countered. बाबा साहेब और गांधी के बीच में कॉन्फ्लिक्ट आज अगर होते तो नहीं होता, गांधी विरुद्ध भगत सिंह आज होते तो नहीं होता, गांधी विरुद्ध मार्क्स ये नहीं होता, फुले, अंबेडकर, मार्क्स, चाहू महाराज, सभी ने शेठ जी और भट्ट जी के खिलाफ लड़ाई का जो संदेश दिया था, उसको आज कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन हमारे हाथ में है, तो उसको लेकर हमको आगे बढ़ना बेहद ज़रूरी है। और पर्यावरण की जो बात है, नदियाँ कैसे बचेगी? आज बेंगलोर में वाटर क्राइसिस है। Why is this water crisis? If it is due to the climate change, which brings in the cycle of drought and flood, as नर्मदा में हजारों घर ध्वस्त हो गए, फ्लडिंग के कारण नहीं, जन्मदिन प्रधानमंत्री जी का मनाने के लिए उन्होंने बड़े बांध बांधे और गेट्स नहीं खोले, और जब खोले तब गुजरात भी ध्वस्त हो गया है। आपको मैं पर्चा दे दूंगी। पर यहाँ दूर दूर कावेरी से पानी आना, इज दैट द ओनली सोल्यूशन? Is there no solution which can be decentralized management of land, water, forest? We need to think about it, and we must compel the governments to think about it. When the acquisition and eviction is also referred to by Advocate Hegdeji, we know that 2013 Act is not implemented. Even Bengaluru Development Authority, when it acquires land around for the housing complex or for any purpose, we expect something different from the present government of Karnataka. They should not only repeal the Anti-Conversion Act, but they should also implement the 2013 Land Acquisition Act, without which the agricultural lands cannot be acquired for the beautifying the city or building the housing complexes. And the workers' issues, we are not taking more time, but we know that 29 labor laws are repealed, while the 3 anti-farmer laws had to be repealed. But these 29 laws being repealed and 4 weak codes to be imposed is something that is an anti-worker policy. 95% of the workers belonging to so-called unorganized sector are unprotected. So migrant labor, the nomadic tribes, the Adivasis who are interstate migrants, no act is implemented. So not only that the laws should be enacted based on the constitutional framework, but also laws should be implemented. But who bothers? Who bothers to really feed every child, to give free education up to 14 years of age, to take the special child care up to 6 years of age, to provide the health security by bringing in prohibition, Article 47. When the governments are earning thousands of crores through liquor business, that needs to be stopped. The women who are facing atrocities, not only in Manipur or Hathras, which are the known incidences, but everywhere are also facing violence due to the liquor business and addictions. Now all this needs to be stopped, and for that the constitution is in our hands. But wait, federal structure. Karnataka government is not getting the proper funds. So when the 5 kilos of grains in the PDS are to be based on the calories needed by a manual laborer, and that is increased fortunately to 10 kilos, the center is playing a game and not providing funds for the same. So the grains not provided, so some DBT, money to be deposited in the accounts, is also another way through which it will go to the liquor shops, and women will face the worst. So ye kaise hoga? And peace, Article 51, the last one in the directive principles, talks about promoting peace. Who is talking about, with courage within the system, not outside, about the, criminal violence faced by Gaza Patti and Palestine? Fortunately, one of the highest courts has given some judgment, but that is also an appeal to Israel, which is supported by the United States of America and so many countries, which is something which we should feel ashamed of, while our government is also not making any proper intervention towards that end of the Constitution. Friends, with all this, we want to fight for right to food, right to housing, right to employment, livelihood, which is more based on the natural resources for farmers, laborers, and human resources, and not just on the monetary financial capital. We have to remember Baba Sahib Ambedkar's economic advice, which is of cooperative farming, collective farming, and maximum of public industries, in which the reservation can be attained through. And still today, in the name of reservation, the positive discrimination, it is Maratha viruddha OBC, it is Dhangar viruddha Adivasis, and so on. So where is the final goal of caste annihilation? Jati nirmulan का उद्देश्य बाबा साहब का और संविधान सभा का और कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन क्या हम भूल गए हैं? ये हमारे सामने सवाल है. मैं सॉरी थोड़ा सा समय लिया है, पर मैं देख रही हूँ कि अभी हमारे पास फिर भी 10 मिनट है, तो आप में से किनको किनको सवाल पूछना है वो जरा हाथ ऊपर करें, और सब सवाल लेकर हम लोग 2-2 मिनट हर एक को सुनेंगे. प्लीज. यस प्लीज. यस 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 प्लीज. माइक किसी देने का.
हेलो, मेधा पटक जी, आपको एक प्रश्न है. नर्मदा आंदोलन के जैसे आप बड़ा आंदोलन में थे, एक लीडरशिप क्वालिटी में आपके जैसे सिंपलिसिटी चाहिए क्या, और कुछ चाहिए लीडरशिप? जन आंदोलन में एक बड़ा लीडर बनना चाहिए, तो क्या क्वालिटी चाहिए लीडरशिप क्वालिटी में?
ठीक है, प्लीज टेक द माइक एंड स्पीक. आप में से जो भी जवाब देना चाहते हैं वो जिस भी जवाब का जवाब दें.
Ma'am, you said that B.R. Ambedkar's vision for the country's economic policy was that most of the industries should have been public industries and it's community farming, etc. Now my question is, we did follow that system of everything being concentrated in the public and a lot of controls on the private industries, and that is how we ended up in the 1991 crisis. And it is only through LPG policies that we finally got our country out of that crisis and our growth improved. And because everything was concentrated in the public sector, there was a lot of inefficiency that happened, a lot of bureaucracy, red tapeism, etc. And transferring more things to the private sector has indeed improved the efficiency and helped our country. Even recently, Air India has been privatized, like it was disinvested by the government because it was running on a loss, and a huge loss. And transferring it to the private sector has helped to get it out of that loss. So, you know, even though Baba Saheb has contributed a lot of things to our country, but don't you think that his vision for the country's economy is a kind of outdated?
Got your question. We will answer.
Mine is not a question. IT industry is relatively very new to India compared to constitution. Except the just born child to the oldest man living, they use so extensively and they are used to it. So my suggestion is the Constitution of India should be made simple, friendly, so that we all get into that mood as we are to the IT industry or mobile, particularly mobile. Thank you.
Please answer this question. Okay. Anyone else?
I have a question.
Yes.
तो unofficially तो secularism word निकाल दिया गया है. तो I just wanted to know CA का आपने जो सर जी protest suggest किया, वो कहाँ तक अब valid रहेगा? उसका अब जो you know the foundation on which that earlier movement was conducted, how valid is that going to be now? Thank you.
Anyone else? Last question is.
I have a question. Harsh was mentioning that when the little boy ate banana, you had about 5,000 people who could have opposed but didn't do anything. Sanjay Hegde says that the courts are there and then the legal fraternity, etc., etc. ತಾವು ಅವಾಗವಾಗ ಬಂದು ಮಾತನಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತೀರಾ, ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ವೆನ್ಯೂ, ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಫೋರಮಲ್ಲಿ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತೀರಾ, ಏನು ಸೊಲ್ಯೂಷನ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳೋಲ್ಲ. ಬಟ್ Siddharth Varadarajan has given the answer. He says, we common people, we cannot speak. I think among the 5,000, the crowd, they would have come to rescue the boy, but then they're afraid of legal consequences. We had such an issue. You were talking about the liquor lobby. We raised our voices, but then there were 10 cases put against us. Where do we get the money to fight and the energy to fight? And these media people have so many cases against them. What is the legal fraternity doing? This is the fear with which people do not want to
I think
speak.
that point is already taken, and they have also answered that it is only the courage and commitment that can take you beyond these kinds of situation. And of course, जेल में जब तक चना रहेगा, आना जाना बना रहेगा. जेल है कितनी लंबी चौड़ी देख लिया है, देखेंगे. ये स्पिरिट होगा तो ही हम मूवमेंट के एक्टिविस्ट हो सकते हैं. आज अनंत तेलतुंबड़े आए हैं, बाबा साहब के वंशज, और उनको भीमा कोरेगांव के नाम पर झूठे हैकिंग के आधार पर जेल में रखा गया. And if it is illegal detention, then also compensation can be paid under the constitutional basis, but not for those who are struggling and being kept in the jail for years and still not even heard. So they are only accused, but their offenses are not proved. So I will just request Samruddha जी, आपको कुछ जवाब देना है इसमें. मेरे ख्याल से एक तो privatization is bringing in efficiency. This is what is the prachar, the propaganda about globalization, liberalization policy that is all over. But what is this efficiency at the cost of? I think Basavarajyoji is sitting there only, you can answer the question.
No, regarding the efficiency, if you go through Article 335 of the Indian Constitution, the efficiency bar is provided under the Constitution. But your efficiency border shall not come in the way of ensuring social justice. Of course, Ambedkar while inserting that particular article, he was very much bent upon the fact that your efficiency bar, which is provided under Article 335, shall not be at the cost of the achieving the social justice, which is the pillar of the Constitution of India. And regarding the under trial prisoners who have been languishing in the jail for several years, just because they are very poor and weaker sections, not able to engage a lawyer, the Supreme Court in fact has given a series of judgments that right against this exploitation and even right against the inordinate delay in conducting the trial is also a violation of the fundamental right under Article 21. But the problem is how best it is we are implementing in reality. There are a host number of decisions are there from the Supreme Court. But we are not finding the reality for the purpose of protecting these under trial prisoners. And Kiran Bedi has given a report. In a report she has said that 70% of the population, prison population in India, they are under trial prisoners. Without their fault, they are languishing and they are separated from the society and they have no relation with their kith and kin. So therefore, the Supreme Court has already given a judgment. Under such circumstances, they should be immediately released.
Yeah, I just want, on CAA, I wanted to say that nothing has changed. The basis on which the struggle against CAA happened, that remains. Because for the first time in India, the Modi government has tried to make religion a criterion for citizenship for anybody, in this case of refugees from Pakistan, Bangladesh and Afghanistan. This is not acceptable. The challenge is there before the Supreme Court. That challenge, I believe, must be heard quickly, and I'm sure the court will find this ultra-virus. But people should oppose this. People will oppose it. And I don't think that, of course, the government will try to disrupt and attack any protest. But the basis, the ideological, political, moral basis continues.
Harshmandarji, boliye. Harshmandarji, please. 2 minutes.
Yeah. No, I agree fully with Siddharth. I think the anti-CA protests were perhaps the most glorious moment of public action that independent India has seen, because when one community was discriminated, every community stood up in solidarity. And that's where our future lies. That's what fraternity means. And one other question about why people didn't, I talked about 5,000 people who saw this boy being lynched and didn't intervene. What explains our silences? Right from 2017 onwards, we've been seeing this epidemic of lynching. Is it fear? Is it indifference? Or is it that I share the same sentiment of hate and I've outsourced my hate to the lynch mob, but I'm happy with what is happening? That's a question that all of us will have to answer for ourselves, because there is a silence. While India is deteriorating, there are many ethical systems. I'll just end with that. But I'll talk about something that Prophet Muhammad said. What is your duty when you see great suffering and injustice? He said, at the very least, respond from your heart, which means at least you feel badly. That doesn't require courage. Then the next higher level is to respond from your tongue, which means you speak out against it. The best among us will respond with our hands, which means we act against it. The country that I want to see is that all of us respond at least from our hearts. then things will change.
हेगड़े जी आपको कुछ 2 मिनट में.
No, I think everybody has spoken, and a lot of people have said, what are the courts doing? I think the courts share what happens here. They speak rightly. They speak a lot. But as somebody a long time ago told me, that clients are not interested in judgments. They are interested in orders. I think that's where courts need to improve. Quick orders. The reasoning can always be come in due time. And the same thing that Harsh said. Let us first respond with our hearts, our heads, and then with our hands. But let us do respond. Let us not simply sit that things are bad and can only go worse.
Yes, right.
I'd like to end with one of my favorite lines from Faiz. Dil na umeed na sahi, naakaam hi to hai. Lambi hai gam ki shaam, par shaam hi to hai. Good evening.
Thank you so much. मुझे लगता है कि हम लोगों ने एक इस डिस्कशन के द्वारा संदेश दिया है कि आज की इकोनॉमी अर्थव्यवस्था बदलनी चाहिए. अभी जो भी क्वेश्चंस बाकी है वो पर्सनली डिस्कस कर सकते हैं. दूसरा संदेश दिया है कि इकोनॉमी बदलनी है तो नेचुरल रिसोर्सेज का मैनेजमेंट का डेवलपमेंट पैराडाइम बदलना चाहिए. अस्तित्व के जो मुद्दे हैं राइट टू लाइफ रिलेटेड वो सब पर हम लोग आग्रह करना चाहिए. उसके लिए हमको जो वंचित है पीड़ित है उनके साथ खड़े होना चाहिए और कम्युनलिज्म कास्टिज्म उसको आगे बढ़ाते हुए एज इंस्टिगेटिव फोर्स जो रियल इश्यूज आर बीइंग पेरिफेरलाइज्ड दैट वी शुड काउंटर and we should reach out to every place wherever violence takes place, at least as a fact-finding team, if not interveners. And that needs courage and commitment to use every kind of freedom and base our actions on every value that is not only in preamble, but many articles of the Constitution underlying fundamental rights and directive principles, which also state is duty bound to. Invariably. Judiciary and executive should be separate is clearly stated in the Constitution. Point is, we also want judiciary and politics to be separate and there should be no illegal, unconstitutional intervention that brings in white ant to the every pillar of democracy. तो बस जावेद अख्तर जी के गीत के 2 लाइनें यही है. एक हमारी एक है उनकी मुल्क में है आवाज़ें दो अब तुम पर है कौन सी तुम आवाज़ सुनो तुम क्या मानो एक हमारी एक है उनकी वो कहते हैं भूले बिसरे मंदिर मस्जिद याद करो हम कहते हैं बेघर बेदर इंसा को आबाद करो. जिंदाबाद. धन्यवाद सबको.
We come to the end of this session. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to all who have contributed to the success of today's deliberation. And further, we express our gratitude to our esteemed panelists for sharing their invaluable perspective on the fundamental rights and directive principles and citizenship. Your insights has enriched our discussion and inspired us to revisit our fundamental rights as a citizen of this country. I also extend my appreciation to all the participants for their active engagement, thought-provoking questions, and constructive contribution throughout the session. Once again, thank you everyone for being a part of this important discussion. We will proceed with our next scheduled session immediately. So I would request the moderator of the next session to kindly take over. Thank you.